Chapter 600. It was just an empty threat. Nong Si did not take it seriously. I've already made it very clear. Please reconsider your choice. That's right, working with you is the result of my insistence. However, if I'm no longer the patriarch because of this, then our cooperation will naturally end. Moreover, I think that even if there's a new patriarch, they won't work with you anymore. After all, cooperation requires both sides to work hard. The threat in Nong Si's words was very obvious. Cooperation required both sides to work hard, and also required both sides to display their strength. If Long Qi did not have the strength, the outcome would be obvious. Long Qi's expression was very ugly at this moment. He wanted to wave his hand and say that if they did not want to cooperate, then so be it. After all, he had the channels to purchase goods and sufficient funds. However, these were not enough for a businessman. What they needed more was a strong sales network. Coincidentally, these were the things that the Sorangan family had and were good at. If he left them, perhaps Long Qi could continue to operate independently. However, it would take a long time to reach a scale. For the sake of money, Long Qi could not make such a brainless decision. Long Qi's expression changed again and again. He smiled very sincerely. Mr. Patriarch, what are you doing? I was just joking. Just as you said, since we are now citizens of Laos, and we are paying business tax, I think they should be more than happy to help us out when we have a problem, right? Long Qi changed his words, or rather, he was forced to change his words. Since the situation was not good, he had no choice but to lower his head. Nong Si smiled in satisfaction. I was just joking with Mr. Long. Since that's the case, when do you think we should talk to the mercenaries about this? This matter cannot be rushed. The mercenaries do big things. How about this, let me contact them first. I'll give you an answer a day later, Long Qi replied with a smile. He had not contacted Yun Kei for a long time. Now, he did not even know where he was. How could he meet him just because he wanted to? Knowing that Long Qi was going to use his connections, Nong Si's goal was achieved. He smiled and left the state preceptor's residence. In the following time, Long Qi immediately sent out his men. He needed to know where Yun Kei was. Where was Yun Kei? Of course, he was in Wanxiang City. However, as an agent of the Security Bureau, his whereabouts had always been difficult to track. Unless he wanted to meet someone else, it was too difficult to find him except for a limited number of people. It would be difficult for Long Qi to find Skylark. But what he didn't know was that Skylark was paying attention to him. He even got the news that Nong Si went to the Long residence. You're finally anxious. Very good. After hearing his subordinate's report, Skylark's face was filled with a victorious smile. Half a day had passed, but there was still no news about Skylark. It wasn't that his men didn't benefit from it, but the mercenaries were an impenetrable force, and outsiders had no chance to talk to them. They couldn't just go to the camp of the mercenaries or the provincial government to look for them openly, right? If that was the case, it wouldn't be looking for someone, but seeking death. Men, prepare a carriage. We're going to General He's residence. Long Qi had no choice but to rely on his old face to do the job. No matter what, He Guang only joined the mercenaries because of his introduction, so he owed him a favor. However, Long Qi knew that this was the only time he could do this. The next time he had something to do, it was hard to say if He Guang would be willing to meet him. Long Qi was quite lucky. He Guang had just returned from killing bandits outside. After the servant reported, a guard walked out of the residence and led Long Qi to the depths of the residence. In front of the guard, Long Qi also lowered his posture. From this point, it could be seen that he was very clear about his identity. Usually, people like this wouldn't be detestable. In the living room, He Guang met Long Qi. After not seeing him for almost 3 months, He Guang had a colder and more murderous aura. Fortunately, when he saw Long Qi, he intentionally restrained his murderous aura and showed a warm side. State Preceptor Long, please don't, General He. In the future, You can just call me Mr. Long. Long Qi didn't dare to be arrogant and refused repeatedly. Okay, Mr. Long. How do you have time to come to my residence? He Guang laughed. He was very satisfied with Long Qi's intentional lowering of his status. Sigh, it's a long story. Long Qi said while observing He Guang with the corner of his eyes, waiting for him to ask him. Otherwise, if he took the initiative to ask and was rejected, it would be too embarrassing. He Guang was very respectful and asked with a smile, Mr. Long, do you have any other troubles? You put down your political affairs and focus on being a rich man. This is something that I can't ask for. Long Qi shook his head, General He, you only see the glamorous side of me. You don't know that business is not so easy. You also know that I'm working with the Sorangan family. Not long ago. He Guang sat in his seat with a serious face. When he heard that someone had robbed a merchant ship on the Mekong River, he couldn't help but frown. He wasn't faking it. He was really angry at the audacity of the Phnom Penh dynasty's General Hun Senator. The current He Guang could be described as a different person than he used to be. With the power of 30,000 soldiers in his hand, he became the representative of the local forces in Laos. Of course, this representative was not self-appointed. The locals were willing to ask him for help. In front of the mercenaries, he didn't dare to call himself the leader of any other forces. This was especially true for the current governor of Laos, Yuan Shaoqian. Although he was young, he was decisive in his actions. In less than 2 months, 7 officials had died in his hands because of crimes, and more than 30 officials had been exiled and sentenced to death. It was this decisive killing that made the politics of Laos become clear. The dark things of the past had disappeared. After all, no one would joke about their own life. With the military power in his hands, He Guang was even more careful in his actions. Even when others came to him for help, he knew what he could ask and what he couldn't do. Otherwise, he would be in deep trouble and unable to save himself. He knew more and had more dealings with the mercenaries. He had met Yuan Shaoqian more than once to discuss the future of Laos. This made him understand what the young man's idea was. The young man wanted to build a strong Laos. This strong Laos would not only have a strong reputation, but also allow the people here to live a rich life. In ancient times, the feudal dynasties were divided into ranks. Laos was also divided into ranks. To be specific, the Han people were the first, and the other foreign races were second, third, or even lower. Yuan Shaoqian wanted to lead all the people on the road to wealth, so that they wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing. Such an ambition was easy to say, but it was very difficult to achieve. Since ancient times, many people with great talents and great foresight had such a goal. However, no matter how hard they worked, there would always be people who didn't have enough to eat or wear warm clothes. It was obvious how difficult it was to achieve wealth together. Yuan Shaoqian had the intention to do this. In his words, as long as the people were willing to work hard and endure hardships, they wouldn't starve. Especially since the potato was a high-yield crop and had been widely planted. If they were lazy, they would be sent to reform through labor. In any case, the people had to be hardworking, and in exchange, they would also become rich. The real people were naturally able to endure hardships. In the past, even if they endured hardships, they wouldn't necessarily have a good harvest. However, under Yuan Shaoqian's leadership, the lives of those who could endure hardships began to change. After all, Laos was going through a huge change, and there was a lot of work to be done. Even if he worked hard to build houses and roads, the remuneration he earned was enough to feed his family. Under Yuan Shaoqian's leadership, Laos was changing day by day. Following that, the young governor began to focus on the treatment and fairness of the people. With Yang Bao, who could complain about any injustice, there were fewer cases of people bullying others. The people could earn more money and live better lives. They could also gain more respect in terms of human rights. This was all brought about by Yuan Shaoqian. As the main representative of the natives of Laos, He Guang naturally saw all of this. This also allowed him to have a better understanding of Yuan Shaoqian's governing philosophy. Wan Shaochen was his direct superior, so how could he do his job well if he didn't figure it out? After understanding all of this, and hearing Nong Si's story, he had a feeling that Wan Shaochen would do something about it. As he had said, they were now legal citizens of Laos, and had paid taxes. Now that there was a problem outside, how could the Laos government ignore it? Okay, I understand. I will find a chance to report it to the higher-ups. He Guang hesitated for a moment, but he didn't make any promises. After all, this matter involved the Kim Bien dynasty. Although the mercenaries were powerful, they had taken down Jiaoji and Lansang kingdoms. Now was the time to digest the fruits of their labor. Who knew if there would be more problems? Long Qi knew that He Guang's current position was a little awkward. With a new master, he had to worry too much about what he said. Long Qi didn't press him too much, and instead, he cupped his fist to express his gratitude. After staying for a while, he left the He mansion. Yunk was in Yang Qindong's mansion, discussing the next step. Since the plan had already started, there was no reason to stop. Chapter 601. Report. The Security Bureau just sent news that Long Qi went to the He family's residence and left after an hour. Tiger's Mane walked into the study and reported to Yang Qindong, who was looking at the sand table. Got it. Yang Qindong nodded and said, pack up. We will head to Wulong City tomorrow morning. Not only was Tiger Edge stunned by this order, but even Skylark, who was analyzing the situation, was also stunned. Wulong City was a big city in Siam that was very close to Lao province. It was less than 300 miles away from Wanxiang City. However, it was still within Siam's territory. Why did the sixth young master want to go there? The two of them could not figure out the meaning of this step. However, since it was the sixth young master's intention, they had to carry it out. Tiger's Mane nodded and left. Yun Kei, who was left behind, quickly looked at Wulong City on the sand table and fell into deep thought. He lowered his head for the time it took for an incense stick to burn. Then, he suddenly shouted, I know, sixth young master is preparing to, shu. Yang Qindong smiled at Yun Kei and nodded, that's right. I am preparing to go to war with Siam. As for the extent of the war, it depends on the attitude of the other party. The sixth young master. Isn't this too risky? After all, we don't have a lot of troops. If we do this, it will be equivalent to going to war on two fronts. Although Yun Kei believed in the strength of the mercenaries, he could not help but worry when he thought about how the enemy this time was much stronger than Jiaoji and Lansang nation. This young master knows, but there will only be progress if there is a challenge. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too boring to always suppress others and beat the weak with strength? Alright, this matter is only known to the few of us. Don't tell Xiao Chen. The young master is looking forward to seeing how he will perform in such a situation, Yang Qindong said with interest. Yun Kei saw all of this and he was very envious. What did Wan Shaochen do to deserve such attention from the sixth young master? Let's hope that he can have a perfect performance this time. Once he passes this test, his future will be limitless. Not only did he not let Wan Shaochen know that Yang Qindong secretly went to Wulong City, but Yang Qindong also did not show any interest in the matter of the Salangan family. He did not say that all of this was arranged by himself. He just wanted to see if the governor whom he had promoted had the ability to handle things. Although the other party was too young, the sixth young master's heart was still filled with hope. After a night of thinking, He Guang went to the provincial government early the next morning. He came to report to the governor, Wan Shaochen, about the results of the Laotian mercenary army and the problems in the province. As the governor, Wan Shaochen was not only in charge of the civil affairs, but also the military. This made him very busy, but also greatly increased his power. For example, if one were to take control of the military and government at the same time, it might cause problems in peacetime. However, in an unstable and dangerous place, such a method of centralizing power in one person was still necessary. At the very least, it would save a lot of unnecessary wrangling. Compared to 2 months ago, Wan Shaochen was thinner and more tanned, but he looked more energetic. After the attendant invited He Guang into the office, he held a piece of paper in his hand and asked 7 or 8 questions. This was one of the methods Yang Qindong used to train them. A good memory was not as good as a bad pen. When He Guang came, he was very clear about the situation of the army. Naturally, he answered all the questions without showing any panic. About an hour later, the questions were answered. Yuan Shaoqian nodded with satisfaction. General He, thank you for your hard work. Laotian is going to be a period of great development in Laotian. We absolutely cannot allow any chaos in public security. So, please don't relax and keep an eye on things. If you find any problems, solve them immediately. If you can't solve them, just report to me. Yes, Governor Yuan, don't worry. I know what to do. He Guang's attitude was very humble. He did not dare to call himself a general in front of Yuan Shaoqian. After the work report, Yuan Shaoqian picked up the tea on the desk and took a sip. Subconsciously, she reminded He Guang that he could leave. Usually, at this time, the subordinates would immediately stand up and leave with the excuse that they still had work to do. However, this time, He Guang did not do so. Instead, he said tentatively, Governor Yuan, I have something that I should report to you. What is it? Yuan Shaoqian was a straightforward person. He was too busy with work. If he was not too busy, he would not ask He Guang to leave immediately. Because in a while, it would be time for the next person to report. It wouldn't be good to chat with others while drinking tea and delaying the main work. Since he had made up his mind, He Guang no longer hesitated. Instead, he used the simplest and most concise words to explain the matter that Long Qi had told him. After saying this, he immediately shut his mouth. He could pass on the message, but it was not up to him to make the final decision. He originally thought it was a military matter. He did not expect that the citizens involved were treated unfairly in other countries. This was the first time he encountered such a matter. For a moment, Yuan Shaoqian did not know how to deal with it. However, his intuition told him that it was not a small matter. Okay, I understand. How about this, I will go to General He's residence tonight. Speaking of which, I have been here for more than 2 months, but I have been busy and did not visit your wife. It is very rude of me. And, when the time comes, I would like to ask General He to invite the people involved. I want to hear their words. Yuan Xiaoli's face was full of smiles. When He Guang heard this, he was excited. Yes, then this general will be waiting for the governor's arrival tonight. What do you mean by not arriving? He said that he was just going to walk around casually. Don't make such a big commotion. Yuan Shaoqian was still smiling, but the reminder in his words was very obvious. That was, he wanted to keep the matter of him going to the He residence as low-key as possible. Don't let everyone know. He Guang immediately understood Yuan Shaoqian's meaning. The other party did not want to make a big commotion before making a decision. He immediately nodded. Yes, Governor Yuan is right. We are just going to walk around in private. We will not disturb others. Very good. Then I will trouble General He to go and prepare. After He Guang left, Yuan Shaoqian intentionally stood up to send him off. This gave He Guang a fright. He quickly said, Governor Yuan, please stay. However, the moment the door closed, He Guang's bent body immediately straightened. This was the first time the governor personally sent him off after he reported his work. Although it was just for show, it was already a big improvement. It proved that his actions had caught the other party's attention. This was definitely a good start. It seems that I did the right thing by reporting this matter. I'll go back now and bring Long Qi and that Ta Nong Si over. I'll tell them what they can say and what they can't say when they meet Governor Yuan tonight. He Guang muttered to himself as he walked out of the building. In the office, Yuan Shaoqian had already closed his eyes and leaned against the back of the chair. Early this morning, he received the decision of the 6th young master to go on patrol. Therefore, when such a problem arose, it was impossible for him to ask for advice. Thinking about what Beta Persei said in the letter, the sixth young master said that you should work as you should, as long as everything is reasonable and legal. If anything happens, he will take care of it. This was not as simple as just saying. Yuan Shaoqian knew that since the sixth young master said it, he could really do it. Even so, if he asked for advice on everything, he would be too narrow-minded. It's just the Phnom Penh dynasty. Daring to touch the caravan of Lao province is tantamount to provoking the Lao provincial government. Even so, it is absolutely impossible for the other party to not give an explanation. Otherwise, if they attack the caravan this time, I am afraid they will attack us next time. After making a general decision in his heart, Yuan Shaoqian opened his eyes again. At this time, there were footsteps outside the door. It was the next official to be received. He Mansion. Today, after He Guang came back, the He residents began to clean up. Then, his personal guards were sent out one by one to be responsible for the safety of the surrounding streets. In short, Governor Yuan came to his residence to give him face. Then, he absolutely could not have any problems, not even the slightest bit. When the sky just turned dark, Long Qi and Nong Si appeared at the door of He Mansion. Sure enough, they were traveling light. Each of them had only brought a personal attendant with them. It was not as simple as what the messenger had said, that they did not cause any commotion. At this time, Nong Si was very excited. Even when he arrived at He Guang's mansion, he still felt like he was in the clouds. Originally, he thought that after forcing Long Qi, even if he would think of a way, there would not be a result so quickly. After all, this person had already retired from the position of state preceptor. Moreover, he was a minister of the previous dynasty. Seriously speaking, it was already good that he was not punished. But who would have thought that the other party really found General He Guang? What was even more unexpected was that the matter had already been reported to Governor Yuan. Who was Governor Yuan? Although he had the title of governor, there was no difference between him and the previous king of Lansang Kingdom, Piaci. Chapter 602. It was rumored that Governor Yuan was very young and his future was limitless. If he could establish a good relationship with him, would the Sorangan family still have to worry about the future? He had asked around and found out that many big shots in Lansang wanted to meet Yuan Shaoqian and have a meal with him. However, they had no way to do so. Now, he had done it. From the moment he received the news, he wanted to shout out to the entire Lansang nation, no. It should be said that everyone in Laos knew about it. However, considering that He Guang had told him to keep a low profile, he suppressed his excitement and followed Long Ping to the He residence. The moment he entered the He manor and saw He Guang, Nong Si had a very respectful look. To him, it was rare to be able to establish a good relationship with He Guang. Alright, Governor Yuan will be here soon. Whatever he asks, just answer. If you don't know, don't say anything. He Guang reminded with a dark face. Of course, these words were mainly directed at Nong Si. Long Qi had been a state teacher before and knew what to do better than him. Yes, yes. Nong Si was an understanding person, so he kept nodding. Alright, then we'll stand here and wait for Governor Yuan to come. After He Guang finished speaking, he stood there in a very standard military posture, giving people the feeling that Governor Yuan would appear in front of him at any time. Long Qi and Nong Si naturally didn't dare to say anything. They also stood behind He Guang and waited. Fortunately, this didn't last very long. In less than an hour, a soldier in armor ran over. Seeing this soldier appear, He Guang's face turned serious. He turned around and said softly, "He's here." Then he turned around and looked into the distance until a group of people slowly appeared. Yuan Shaoqian also kept a low profile this time. Other than himself, there were only 6 Lingfeng guards. After becoming the governor of a province, Yang Qindong gave him the standard of a squad of guards. However, he would not bring all of them with him. Usually, he would only bring 4 to 6 people with him when he took a break. "Greetings, Governor Wan. Seeing that Wan Shaochen was about to appear in front of his residence, He Guang had already stepped forward to welcome him with a fawning expression. His attitude was completely different from He Longqi and Nong Si's earlier attitude. General He, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. I had some business to deal with at the last minute, so I was delayed. Wan Shaochen was very young and humble. Even when facing his subordinate, He Guang, he still had a humble expression on his face. This was hard to imagine. Feudal dynasties had a strict hierarchy system. Superiors were always indifferent to their subordinates. Even if they did something wrong, they would not admit it. Of course, the subordinates would not dare to pursue the matter. However, Wan Shaochen came late and apologized, which greatly exceeded the expectations of Long Qi and Nong Si. The two of them looked at each other at the same time, as if to say, could the person who came be Governor Wan? How could he apologize to a subordinate general? This didn't make sense. He Guang stood there. He was also frightened by Wan Shaochen's attitude. Although the other party just said it casually, he still expressed his apology. This suddenly made him very nervous. Governor Wan, please don't say that. You are a superior. We should wait for you. Hey, you can't say that. The sixth young master said that all people are born equal. As long as everyone is willing to work hard, is willing to improve, and has a benevolent heart, then they will be respected. So, I came late and delayed your time. It's just an apology. It's nothing. It's something that should be done. Wan Shaochen suddenly became serious, as if he was talking about something very important. He Guang also put away the charming smile on his face. Wan Shaochen had mentioned the sixth young master, who was a godlike existence in the eyes of some people. Even He Guang had only seen Yang Qindong once when he entered the city. At that time, he was so scared that he didn't dare to raise his head. He only knew that the sixth young master was very powerful, very powerful. Now that even Governor Wan Shaochen was so serious, he of course had to stop smiling. These words also reached Long Qi and Nong Si's ears, and they couldn't help but tremble. Since Governor Wan Shaochen said that all people were equal, didn't it mean that they had a chance? After all, they were also citizens of Laos. After a simple greeting at the door, He Guang quickly invited Wan Shaochen into the house. This is the first time I'm visiting. I brought some gifts for sister-in-law. General He, please accept it. Wan Shaochen said with a smile as he casually sized up the He residence. A Leng Feng guard behind him then handed over a very exquisite box. This was the first cosmetics and perfume that were taken out of the imitation warehouse. After continuous development and self-processing in Qiming City, there was a new brand and packaging, Yang's Beautiful Beauty. Yang's Beautiful Beauty cosmetics had now become the best item in the eyes of upper-class women. Not only could it make women whiter and delay aging, there was also a set of 6 bottles of perfume that could make women exude different fragrances. The value of this set alone was more than 2,000 taels, and it belonged to the kind that had a price but no market. If it could be taken further away, even if the price was several times higher, it would still be a hot commodity. Thank you, this general thanks Governor Wan for his kindness. He Guang took the gift with a flattered look and carefully put it in the hands of the servant. He spread his right arm and said, Governor Wan, the banquet is ready, please. Let's go together. Wan Shaochen still smiled and nodded, and under He Guang's lead, step by step, walked towards the banquet hall. Several people walked and chatted, and Long Qi and He Nongxi were also introduced to Wan Shaochen by He Guang. Mr. Long has made a great contribution to the liberation of Lao province. This is something that the world will not forget. Looking at Long Qi, Wan Shaochen said seriously. Thank you for Governor Wan's recognition, thank you. Long Qi said with tears running down his face. Since the Lansang kingdom was destroyed and changed to Lao province, who knows how many people scolded him behind his back, saying that he was a traitor, unfilial, and so on. Although Long Qi could shamelessly ignore all of this, he still found that many people alienated from him. There were even people who threatened that a disloyal person like Long Qi would not really believe him. The current Lao province was only because it wanted to stabilize, so it did not bring up the old debts. It would not be long before someone came to find trouble with him. What a joke! The mercenaries gave Long Qi 5 million taels of silver. That was a huge sum. How could he not take it back? It was only a matter of time. Look, Long Qi would not be able to jump around for long. When these words reached Long Qi's ears, he was already trembling with fear. It must be said that he had considered this problem before, and he had the same worries, but what could he do? Leave now. If he really did that, it would only speed up the mercenaries' pace of making a move on him. After thinking about it, Long Qi decided to stay quiet, and he even reduced the chances of him showing up. It was so that people could gradually forget about him. Just like when he partnered with the Salangan family to do business, he would not show up. Instead, he chose to make a fortune in silence. This time, if it wasn't for this problem, he would also not want to have any dealings with the mercenaries. Even if Wan Xiaoqin's power was monstrous, he did not want to see him if he could. Long Qi was not the only one with this idea. In the current Lao province, the mercenaries seemed to have gained a firm foothold, and they had gained the support of many people. However, the ones who truly supported them were the commoners who had benefited from them, as well as the Han people living in Lao province. Because of the arrival of the mercenaries, the commoners had their own fields, jobs to do, and money to earn. Their lives were much better than before. With the thought of not forgetting the person who dug the well when they drank water, they would naturally be grateful and support such a force. There was no need to mention the Han people. Ever since this place became Lao province, their status was extremely stable. Regardless of whether it was in terms of treatment or the degree of respect they received. As Han citizens, they were given more farmland than the other races. Even if they were to work, their income would still be twice that of the other races. As Han citizens, they also enjoyed a high personal status. For example, when they walked on the streets, even the other races' officials would have to take the initiative to stop and let them pass first. This was something that the Han people had never enjoyed before. Furthermore, this was all brought to them by the mercenaries, so how could they not be grateful? However, they were the only ones who truly supported the mercenaries. As for the nobles and tycoons, they would only treat those who gave them more benefits. On the other hand, there was no need to talk about friendship. Only benefits were eternal. Long Qi also had such thoughts. He wanted to borrow the might of the mercenaries, but he did not want to get too close to them. This was the true thinking of people at his level. Right now, Wan Xiaoqin's words of, "Your contributions will not be forgotten by the world," made him feel as though he had found a soulmate. He then thought about how everyone was not optimistic about him, and wanted to isolate him. However, the mercenaries, who used to be his enemy, were actually treating him so highly. Under such a comparison, he could not help but feel like crying. When Wan Xiaoqin saw Long Qi's expression, a smile appeared in his eyes. He knew that the other party was in a difficult situation and needed his help. There was no need for him to be courteous. As if he had just thought of something, he said, "Mr. Long, you were once a grand tutor. I'm sure you have a lot of connections. How about this, if you have the time, you can interact with some of the nobles, and contact some of them to contribute to the development of Lao province. If you need any help, our provincial government is willing to back you up. How about that?" Chapter 603. This was an invitation. Long Qi was stunned at first, but before he could react, He Guang's elbow had already pressed against his waist. Although he didn't speak, the meaning was already very obvious, that is, there is such a good thing, you should quickly agree. Of course, this was a good thing. This meant that Wan Xiaoqin needed Long Qi to unite the hearts of the nobles. This was equivalent to working for the mercenaries. If anyone dared to disrespect Long Qi, it would not only be disrespecting Long Qi, but it would also be disrespecting the Laos government and the mercenaries. The result would be obvious. In fact, Long Qi was not very old, just over 50 years old. he could still continue to shine. The most important thing was that he used to be the state preceptor here, so he was very familiar with the upper class. The matter of unifying the hearts of the nobles, in the eyes of an outsider like Yuan Shaochen, may not be easy to do. It would take a lot of time just to investigate and understand some things. But it was not a problem for him. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was easy to do. Thinking that once he could become a representative of the mercenaries, who would dare not to give face to him, Long Qi's heart immediately became lively. At the moment, his old face flushed red and he cupped his fist to Yuan Shaoli. "Thank you, Governor Yuan. As long as my old bones are still here, I will do my best to do this matter." "Ha, good." Yuan Shaochen laughed and reached out to help Long Qi up. This was also an unexpected surprise. With Long Qi as the vanguard, many things will be much smoother. At least, he knew who could be friends and who could be enemies. It was okay to be generous to friends. But to enemies, there was only one word: kill. Kill until they were terrified, kill until they were afraid, and if it still didn't work, then kill until they were all dead. Anyway, the lives of the foreigners were never the first. After greeting Long Qi, Yuan Shaochen's gaze fell on Nong Si again. The Sorangan family is a famous business family. This governor has also heard of it. You are very business-minded and capable. Your business channels are also perfect, which is admirable. I don't dare. Nong Si saw that Long Qi had already leaned over, and his face was already full of envy. But he knew that such a good thing had nothing to do with him. Not for anything else, just because they were businessmen. Businessmen could not be too political. Otherwise, if they wanted to do business in other countries to make money, they would be ostracized. That would be a great loss. Yuan Shaochen did not have the intention to rope him in. The development of Laos could not be done without businessmen. But that didn't mean that he couldn't live without a single merchant. Could it be that he, Butcher Zhang, would be able to eat a pig with hair if he left? As they spoke, they arrived at the banquet hall. Yuan Shaochen naturally sat at the head of the table, He Guang sat on the left, Long Qi sat on the right, and Nong Si sat on the opposite side. Wine and dishes were served, followed by a toast. After 3 rounds of wine and 5 dishes, everyone was almost done eating. Next, it was time to get down to business. Nong Si gave full play to his potential as a businessman. He told the story of Sorangan clan's encounter on the Mekong River as if it was a story. He didn't add anything, nor did he add any personal opinions. He knew that such a big event couldn't be exaggerated at all. Otherwise, it would easily backfire. Yuan Shaochen listened very carefully. Even when Nong Si finished talking, he did not express his opinion at the first moment. On the other hand, He Guang, who was sitting on the left, reprimanded General Hun Sen's behavior. It seemed that he did it deliberately. After all, he was now a mercenary. Of course, he had to stand on the right side. Hun Sen. What's his background and identity? Yuan Shaochen wanted to know more about the situation, so he looked at the 3 people. Let me answer that, Long Qi said. He had always wanted to perform well. As a former state preceptor, he was very familiar with the situation of the surrounding countries. It was not an exaggeration to say that he knew everything. From Long Qi, Yuan Shaochen learned more about Han. Senator Hun Sen was one of the important military representatives of the Golden Bian dynasty. His position in the army was second only to General De En. Although they were both generals, Hun Sen and De En were quite different. General De En would treat his soldiers with sincerity. Unless it was necessary, he would not be too cruel to his soldiers. If possible, he would try his best to give his soldiers some opportunities to improve themselves. Hun Sen was different. This person was ruthless and extremely greedy. He even dared to embezzle the pay of his soldiers, which caused many people to be dissatisfied with him. However, this person was very good to those who were stronger than him. He would give gifts during festivals, which made him a good impression in the eyes of the higher-ups of the Golden Bian Kingdom. Even King Boromir had a good impression of him. It could be said that he was a typical example of flattering the superior and bullying the inferior. There were too many people who had received benefits from him, so it was difficult to touch him. After Long Qi introduced the situation one by one, he finally added some of his own thoughts. As far as this old man knows, although this person is ruthless, he is still very discerning when doing things. He is very clear about who can be offended and who can't be offended. This time, he suddenly attacked the Sorangan family, which is different from his usual behavior. It is really unreasonable. What Long Qi meant was that the Sorangan family was a part of Lao province and had a good relationship with Da-an in the Golden Bian Kingdom. Logically speaking, Hun Sen should not have any thoughts of attacking them. Could it be that he was blinded by greed and dared to rob money for money? Long Qi could not be blamed for having such thoughts. This matter was not done by Hun Senator, it was done by Yunk with Yang Chindong's consent. The reason why Hun Sen was chosen was that this person was very greedy and was very famous. If he was not the scapegoat, who else could it be? Of course, Wan Shaochen would not delve into the reason. He only knew that the citizens and merchants of Lao province had been persecuted. As the governor of the province, he had to seek justice. Otherwise, an official who only knew how to be unruly in his own home would not be respected. After seriously understanding the matter, Wan Shaochen's eyes fell on Nong Si, wanting to hear his opinion. Nong Si knew that it was time for him to express his opinion, so he told Long Qi his plan. Governor Wan, I have arranged for someone to go to the Golden Bian Kingdom and ask Hun Sen to return the stolen money. I also sent someone to plead with General Dun, hoping that he can put some pressure on Hun Sr., that's it. Wan Shaochen looked at Nong Si for a long time and realized that Nong Si had finished speaking. He looked at him with some dissatisfaction. Yes, that's it. Nong Si nodded with a puzzled face. He thought to himself, isn't it enough? It's already good enough to recover the lost money. As for the people who were killed, they can only blame themselves for their bad luck. That's not enough. Wan Shaochen shook his head decisively, then looked at Nong Si and said, Patriarch, since you have come to me, it means that you have found the Lao provincial government. If this matter is so simple, it is tantamount to blasphemy against the provincial government. Do you understand? Ah. Nong Si just wanted to recover the lost money and reopen the trade with the Golden Bian Kingdom. He didn't think so much. Looking at Nong Si's shocked face, Wan Shaochen shook his head. Businessmen are businessmen, after all. They only see the benefits in their eyes. How can they see the big picture? It seems that I need to remind him. Patriarch, now I'm giving you two choices. First, pretend that you didn't report this matter to the provincial government, and we didn't receive your request. You can deal with it yourself. Whether you suffer a loss or gain, it's your family's business. Second, report this matter to the provincial government and ask them to hand over the murderer, compensate for the loss, and make a public apology, and guarantee that this kind of thing won't happen again. As for whether they will agree or not, we will communicate with them. If they are really arrogant and don't put the citizens and businessmen of Lao in their eyes, then we will have to teach them a lesson. Teach them a lesson? He Guang heard it clearly. Governor Wan, do you mean to send troops? I don't rule out that possibility. Wan Shaochen didn't hesitate and said directly. Hiss. Whether it was He Guang, Long Qi, or Nong Si, when they heard that Wan Shaochen didn't rule out the possibility of sending troops, they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. It's just losing some money and some people, these losses are the Sorangan family's own business. They didn't pay more taxes to the Lao government, but because of this, Wan Shaochen didn't hesitate to send troops. This result is really unexpected, and they didn't even think about it before. At this moment, the way the three looked at Wan Shaochen changed. Although this person is still young, he seems to be covered with a layer of halo that makes people look up to him. Okay, Patriarch, you can make a choice. What I can say is that no matter what choice you make, I will respect you. But please remember, if you don't want to make a big deal out of this, then all the consequences of this matter will be borne by your family. If you encounter unfair things in the future, don't think that we will stand up for you. In other words, there is only one chance, understand? Of course, Wan Shaochen had his own reasons for saying this. Lao had just been established, and there were too many things to be done. It was not the right time to start a war. It would be best if they could avoid it. However, if the Sorangan family were to request the government, it would be a different story. If they were to ignore the request, it would be a disheartening blow to the hearts of the people, which would be detrimental to the establishment of a united Lao province. Chapter 604. For the sake of the people, for a better and more united Laos, even if the time was not right, he dared to fight. Because he believed in the sixth young master and the mercenary army. As for giving Nong Si only one chance to choose, it was because a government could not be controlled by businessmen. Today you want to do this, tomorrow you want to do something else. Do you think the government is run by you alone? Now, he had to make a decision to stop this kind of thing from happening again. Wan Shaochen stated the conditions, and it was Nong Si's turn to think about it. This was a serious matter, and it might even involve the mercenary army. He had to be careful. Wan Shaochen did not intend to urge him. Instead, he chatted with He Guang and Long Qi about the rich families in Laos. The casual conversation also allowed him to know more about the country, especially about some of the hidden nobles. He got first-hand information about what kind of people they were and what they liked. As for Nong Si, his forehead was covered with layers of cold sweat. He really couldn't make this decision. He wanted to ask if he could go back and think about it, but he thought about Wan Shaochen's identity. This time, he took the initiative to ask for help. How could he be given time to think about it? However, if he really sent the army for a few 100,000 taels of silver, it would be a bit of a joke. But if he did not ask Wan Shaochen, would Hun Sen let him go? He had already robbed him once, and he had already offended him. He was afraid that there would not be a second time. Increase the protection of the caravan? What a joke. That was Hun Sen's territory. Even if he hired more people, how could he be a match for Hun Sen? Not to mention that hiring one more person would cost more money, which was not in line with the rules of businessmen to save money. In other words, if he did not ask for help from the Laos government, he was afraid that the Sorangans would not be able to trade with the Phnom Penh dynasty in the future. Not only would he lose a big customer, but he might also cause Wan Shaochen's dissatisfaction. What? You came to ask me for help, but after I gave you an idea, you became timid. What do you think the Laos government is? On the other hand, if things got out of hand, the business of the Golden Rim dynasty might really be abandoned. But it wasn't that there weren't any benefits. On the contrary, there would be great benefits. After this incident, the Solangan family would become famous. In the future, wherever their caravan went, who would dare to provoke them? Wouldn't they be afraid of the mercenary army? In the long run, enduring the pain for a while seemed to be a good thing. After all, he, Nong Si, was still young and had some guts. In addition, if he couldn't solve this problem, he would have to give up the position of patriarch. This was something he was unwilling to accept. After thinking about it, there seemed to be only one choice left. How is it? Has the clan leader made his decision? Wan Shaochen could wait, but he couldn't wait endlessly. There were so many things for him to deal with. Every minute was precious to him. Knowing that he had to make a decision, Nong Si's eyes flashed with determination. Okay, I'll listen to Governor Wan's orders. He Guang and Long Qi weren't surprised that Nong Si would be so tactful. If he hadn't made such a choice, they would have been suspicious and cut off all ties with him. After all, in a place like Lao province, disobeying Wan Shaochen wouldn't lead to anything good. Okay. Wan Shaochen patted the table to show that he was a little excited. That's it. Don't stop what the Solangan family has been doing. Once the Golden Rim dynasty gives a result that is not satisfactory, you report it to Yang Pao. After everyone knows about it through the World Knowledge Tea House, it's time for our government to step in. Yuan Shaoqian didn't intend to directly put pressure on the Golden Rim dynasty. He even used the excuse of sending troops. At this stage, the main focus of the provincial government was still on economic development. If he really did this, it was inevitable that he would encounter some opposition. Although with his identity and relationship with Yang Qindong, he could make his words carry weight, after all, they were all working together. It was better not to fall out with him if it was possible. If this matter was reported to Yang Bao and the whole world knew about it, then even if it was for the sake of dignity and face, they could only fight. Only the people in the government would not say anything else. Only when the people's hearts were united could they do great things. Yuan Shaoqian made a plan according to his thoughts. After an hour, he left He Mansion in a low-key manner. Unless he had arranged a spy here before, otherwise, he would not know that Governor Yuan had visited his mansion at night. When Yang Qindong received the information from the security bureau that Yuan Shaoqian had visited He Mansion at night and met with Long Qi and Nong Si secretly, the corners of his mouth curled up. No, Governor Yuan knows when to advance and when to retreat. It's good that he knows to keep a low profile before things are settled. But if that's the case, I think we have to speed up our actions. Looking at the vast dense forest in front of him, he issued a military order: speed up the march and gather at the designated place. The capital of the Golden Rim dynasty was Golden Rim City. The people sent by the Solingans finally arrived. They found General Dagon and asked him to put pressure on the Golden Rim dynasty. At the same time, they found General Hun Sen to express their dissatisfaction and their intention to ask for the silver back. Hun Sen was naturally confused. Why did he have to give the silver back to them? Moreover, it was more than 100,000 taels. Did they think he was easy to bully? They could find any reason to bully him. The other party was just a businessman from Laos. He couldn't represent the Laos government, let alone the mercenaries. Why should he be afraid of such a person? As a result, he was kicked out before he could even see General Hun Sen's face. The soldiers also threatened that if he dared to make trouble again, it wouldn't be as simple as kicking him out next time. At least a part of his body would be left behind. The people from the Solingans who found General Dagon didn't have a good ending. General Dagon had only received some benefits from them. Why would he fall out with another general with real power for such a small benefit? Choosing the lesser of two evils, Dagon's approach wasn't wrong. But what he did was equivalent to cutting off all hope for the Solingans. The people who were sent out returned to Wanxiang City and reported the result to the Patriarch, Nong Si. If it was before, Nong Si would have been heartbroken and helpless when he heard the result. But now, he knew that Governor Yuan would take action. He naturally had confidence in his heart. He immediately ordered people to find the arranged reporters and let them report to Yang Pao about the tragedy of the Solingans caravan in Shangding City of the Golden Rim dynasty. It was also known as the Mekong River tragedy. The next day, the Yang family published the Mekong River tragedy in the newspaper. The news spread through the World Knowledge Tea House and soon caused a great sensation. The injustice suffered by the Solingans in the Golden Rim dynasty had been spread throughout the upper class of Laos. This was naturally because of Long Qi. During this period of time, under the banner of Yuan Shaoqian, he secretly met with many nobles of the Lansang kingdom. While deepening his friendship with them, he also reached a lot of consensus. This was not only because Long Qi, as the state preceptor, was good at talking with people. There was also a more important reason. All the nobles knew that there was no hope of reviving the country. Even their king, Piasi, was said to have been sent to the sea and put under house arrest. Without a leader, they were like a pile of loose sand. It was too difficult for them to make any progress. They were defeated one by Long Qi using various means. It was one thing for Long Qi to say it, but it was another thing for it to be published in Yang Pao. This would make it known to everyone. It was even tantamount to forcing the government to make a statement. Could it be that the young Governor Yuan was ready to put pressure on the Golden Rim dynasty and was even prepared to go to war? When the nobles were still guessing how much trouble this matter would cause, the news spread to the people and really caused a lot of anger. Many people were very unhappy with the behavior of the Golden Rim dynasty. With the help of some people, there were already many people who thought that the Golden Rim dynasty should give an explanation for this matter. If they still did not bow down, then they would not hesitate to go to war. For this reason, many young people said that once the war started, they were willing to sign up for the army and do their best to protect the dignity of Laos. There was a motive, a reason, and even a momentum was created. On the third day, Wan Shaoqian, who had been secretly paying attention to this matter, finally expressed his opinion at a meeting of the provincial government. He had every reason to suspect that the injustice suffered by the Sorangan family was caused by the Phnom Penh dynasty. Their ultimate target was Laos, which was still under construction and development. As the governor of Laos, he said that he liked peace and loved peace. However, if anyone dared to trample on the dignity of Laos, then he would not hesitate to go to war. Even if he had to pay the price, he would seek justice and an explanation. He even reserved the right to send troops to seek justice. Wan Shaoqian's words naturally caught the staff of the provincial government off guard. This was an economic development meeting. How could they talk about war? Wasn't this off topic? However, anyone who had seen Yang Pao in the past 3 days knew that Governor Wan was also forced. After all, the people under his rule had been treated unfairly. If they did not make a statement and did not give an explanation, then who would believe them? As a result, although Wan Shaoqian suddenly made a statement, there was no one who stood up to stop him at the meeting. This was because not only did they doubt Wan Shaoqian's ability, but also the vast majority of the people of Laos. In the face of such a powerful force, who would stand up to stop him? Chapter 605. The meeting went on smoothly. After that, Wan Shaoqian sent a messenger to the Phnom Penh dynasty to demand an explanation. The speed of the response fully reflected the high efficiency of the government. For this reason, Yang Bao also specially added an explanation, and this news also made many people rejoice. From this matter, they also saw that they had a powerful backer behind them. If they could win this war, or force the Phnom Penh dynasty to bow their heads, no matter where they went in the future, they would be able to hold their heads high and not be afraid of being targeted. The messenger was very fast. He left the city at noon and rushed all the way. After 7 days, he arrived in Phnom Penh city. He took out a document and said that he wanted to see the king of the Phnom Penh dynasty. The officials of the Ministry of Rights were responsible for receiving the messenger from Laos. When they learned the purpose of the messenger, these officials were shocked. They were shocked that a caravan was killed. How could the Laos government be so agitated? Could it be that one of the people who was killed was a high-ranking official in the provincial government? Faced with the firm attitude of the messenger, the receptionist did not dare to be careless. He quickly reported the matter. In the end, the document asking for compensation and an apology was sent to King Boromir's desk. When Boromir saw this document, he felt a sense of confusion. But then, he was furious. He immediately ordered someone to find General Hun Senator. He wanted to ask if the matter was true. If it was true, General Hun Sen was too bold. Due to the mercenary army's strength and combat power, it took half a year to conquer Jiaoji and Lansang respectively, forcing the surrounding countries to take the initiative to form an alliance. For example, the Phnom Penh dynasty was now an ally of Siam and the Awol dynasty. Although they were allies, it did not mean that they were willing to compete with the mercenary army. At least, none of the 3 countries were willing to take the initiative to provoke the mercenary army and become their first target. Perhaps in the final battle, the 3 countries would win, but the first country to be defeated would definitely be the most miserable. Even if they won, they would not get any benefits. Therefore, the 3 countries put their hopes on other countries. They hoped that other countries would fight with the mercenary army to the death first, so that they could reap the benefits. However, this definitely didn't mean that his country would be the first country to fight to the death with the mercenaries. Hun Sen was urgently called to the palace. As soon as he saw Hun Sen, he was scolded by the king. Hun Sen didn't know what he had done recently to incur the king's anger. When Bo Guoma was tired of scolding, he threw the document at Hun Sen's feet. He looked at Hun Sen with an expression that said, "Look at what you've done." Hun Sen picked up the document with trepidation. When he saw what was written on it, he immediately regained his confidence. He was greedy for money, and had done many things that crossed the line, but the Salangan family's caravan was definitely not under his command. So at this moment, he strongly refuted, and even cursed to prove his innocence. Hun Sen raised his head and looked as though he had been greatly wronged. When Boromir saw this, he started to doubt the authenticity of this matter. After all, there was no reason for Hun Sen to lie in front of him. If he did, he would find a way to make up for it. "You really didn't do this?" Although Boromir was 70% convinced, he couldn't help but ask with certainty. "Absolutely not. If I did, I'm willing to be burned to ashes after my death," Hun Sen said fiercely. Of course, he was full of confidence. Ever since the Salangan sent people over, he had deliberately called a few of his confidants over. In the end, he confirmed that these people didn't do anything. Everything was a misunderstanding. Now that someone was using this matter as an excuse, of course he wasn't afraid. "If you didn't do it, why did the Salangans insist that you did it? They even sent a document from Laos because of this. Could it be that they are deliberately putting the blame on us so that they can use the army against us?" Boromir's eyes kept darting around as he considered all kinds of possibilities. That must be it. They want to use the army against us. "Your Majesty, the mercenaries are very ambitious. This is the reason they are looking for." "We have to be careful," Hun Sen immediately agreed after hearing what Boromir said. "Ah. So that's the case. How can they bully us like this? Why are they looking for us? What should we do? Why don't General Hun?" Boromir was halfway through his sentence when he shook his head. Now that he had formed an alliance with Siam and the Awad dynasty, if he showed any intention of backing out, it would mean that he had voluntarily withdrawn from the alliance. If that happened, if the mercenaries really chose him as their next target, without an ally, how could he resist them? It seemed that it was impossible to back down. However, if he insisted on being stubborn, he didn't want to be attacked by the mercenaries. He couldn't make a decision at the moment. He looked at Hun Sen, who was still waiting for his orders, and waved his hand. "You can leave now. By the way, when people ask you about this matter, don't say anything. Don't admit or deny it. Let's see how it goes." "Oh," Hun Sen responded intentionally. It seemed that this matter had something to do with him. However, since the king had such an attitude, what else could he do other than agree? Before Boromir could come up with a solution, he kept delaying the matter. When the messenger from Laos failed to meet him 3 times, he left angrily. Before he left, he even said in a domineering tone that if he still couldn't get a satisfactory answer when he returned to Laos, he would send an army instead of an emissary to Laos. The messenger left. Based on what he said before he left, there wasn't much time left for the Phnom Penh dynasty. There were only 7 days left. If they couldn't make a decision, it seemed like a war was imminent. When he heard that a war was about to break out, Boromir was really afraid. The military strength of the Phnom Penh dynasty was only average. In terms of territory, it was smaller than Laos. Once a fight broke out, what would he use to defend against the mercenary army? He couldn't win the war. If he couldn't win, he would have to bow down. If he bowed down, the mercenaries would have no reason to send an army. Although it would be humiliating and might even cause dissatisfaction with his allies, what other choice did he have? Just when Boromir was hesitating, and he was even inclined to admit defeat, the messengers from Siam and the Awol dynasty suddenly appeared. They all expressed their approval of the Phnom Penh dynasty's initiative to attack Laos. At the same time, they also stated that if Laos wanted to harm the Phnom Penh dynasty, they wouldn't sit idly by. They would take the initiative to send troops to help. After all, they were allies. With the support of his allies, Boromir's confidence increased a little. However, he still couldn't make a decision. But it was at this moment that something unexpected happened. He didn't know how, but this matter was spread all over the country. Immediately, a large number of citizens stood up and expressed that they would not lower their heads for the sake of the country's dignity. At this critical moment, they were willing to fight for the country. Following the pleas of the people, more and more nobles and rich gentry stood up. They expressed that they would not bow down to the unreasonable accusations of Lao province. For this reason, they were willing to pay a large amount of military expenditure to support the king. The people's matter was easy to deal with. As long as the public opinion was good, the kind and ignorant people could be easily manipulated and led. But why did the nobles stand up as well? Boromir was very puzzled. He immediately sent someone to investigate. Soon, the results reached his ears. It turned out that the nobles did this for the sake of their own interests. They said that it was for the sake of their interests because the envoys of Siam and Ava contacted them in private. They said that as long as Laos was defeated and occupied, the nobles would get a lot of benefits. They had no choice because there were too many precedents. Whether it was in Vietnam or Laos, many of the nobles' fields had been divided and their houses occupied. Once the mercenaries occupied Phnom Penh dynasty, the nobles would be forced to a dead end. This was indeed the case. In the spirit of giving land to the rich was the fastest way to get closer to the people and gain their support. This was done in both Vietnam and Laos. Many rich gentry went bankrupt because of this, and some of them even had their properties confiscated because of this, and their entire family was taken away to reform through labor. However, not all nobles were targeted like this. For example, some nobles who were doing legitimate business or inherited their titles and relied on their salaries. Because they didn't have a lot of land and didn't do anything evil, they still maintained their strength intact. But no one knew that if these people were not targeted now, they would not be targeted in the future. What if the mercenaries were to gain a foothold? Would they do something to them? No one could say for sure. This scared the nobles of Phnom Penh dynasty. In addition, some people instigated them, so they all stood up. Instead of being at the mercy of others, they might as well fight. What if they defeated the mercenaries? Then, not only would they be fine, but there would also be a lot of benefits to be gained. It was clear that everyone knew what they should do in this situation. As a result, these people jumped out and decided to take a gamble. If it was only the support of the people, Boromir was not worried. He was the ruler here. As long as he gave the order, with the help of the army, it would be easy to suppress some people. However, with the participation of these nobles, it was completely different. These people's forces were complicated. If things went wrong, even his throne would be in danger. These people were not to be offended. In other words, his rise to the throne was inseparable from the support of these people. Chapter 606. With the support of the people, the support of the allies of the two countries, and the pressure of the nobles, Boromir had no other choice. He made up his mind to not lower his head, and began to mobilize the army. While asking for military funds from the nobles, he also began to recruit soldiers from the people. There was no such thing as an airtight secret, not to mention that the Golden Bien dynasty had no intention of hiding their actions. Just as the emissary returned to Wanxiang City, new news came. The Golden Bien dynasty had begun to prepare for war, and had recruited 100,000 soldiers from the people. In addition to his original army, the number of soldiers reached 400,000. When the number of enemies was reported to Wan Shaoqian, he was shocked. His first reaction was to ask his subordinate, the sixth young master, where was he? When he found out that the sixth young master had returned to Wanxiang City and was in the original Lansang Palace, Wan Shaoqian put down everything in his hands and rushed to the palace. Now that things had gotten out of hand, he could not hold it in anymore. He urgently needed the support of the sixth young master. Yang Qindong returned to Wanxiang City the night before yesterday. As the saying goes, leaving the city without a sound, returning without a sound. He returned after arranging everything. After being busy for a while, he came back and had a good sleep. When he woke up, Yang Qindong began to stroll around the palace. As he walked around, he clicked his tongue and sighed, "These bastards really know how to enjoy life. The country isn't very big, and there are still many people who can't afford to eat. Their palaces are bigger and more luxurious than the other. How many people's hard-earned money is this? Young master, the palace in Crimson City is better than here." Hearing Yang Qindong's sigh, Tiger's Mane thought that the sixth young master was mentally unbalanced, and wanted to comfort him. "I know." Yang Qindong nodded, then looked at Tiger's Mane as if he was looking at an idiot. This immediately attracted Beta Persei's laughter from the other side. Knowing that he was being laughed at by Beta Persei and seen as an idiot by the sixth young master, Tiger's Mane was a little unconvinced. He wanted to explain, but Yang Qindong spoke first. "The young master thought that it would be a waste to have such a big palace here. Why don't we make good use of it? Why is there no one living here? The young master can live here. In the future, he will have a palace in every province he goes to. How great would that be?" Tiger's Mane seemed to be dissatisfied with the contempt and took the initiative to speak. "What? In your eyes, the young master is a person who likes to be extravagant and wasteful?" After rolling his eyes again, Yang Qindong did not give Tiger's Mane a chance to speak. Instead, he said as if he had made some kind of decision, "I think we can move the business street to the palace. This way, not only will the business area be bigger, but doing business in the palace will also attract more curious people. That way, we can earn more money, right? If they really did business in the palace, they could really attract more merchants. Think about it, because of the difference in levels, although merchants were rich, their social status was not high. Most of them did not have the opportunity to enter the palace. If there really was such an opportunity, there would definitely be merchants who had not established business relations with the Yang family who would want to take a look. As long as they came, with the variety of products and novelty of the Yang family's business, there was no need to worry that those people would not take out money to buy the goods. Wouldn't that increase the speed of earning money? In terms of earning money, the trading company of the outer skies was not inferior to the fighting strength of the mercenaries. Especially the novelty of the products and the variety of products. No matter where they were, these products would be crazily fought over. However, Yang Qindong was still not satisfied. There were too many things that needed to be spent on the Yangtze. For example, high salaries. Currently, the officials of Vietnam and Laos were receiving high salaries, which were even higher than the tax revenue of these two provinces. If they wanted to reach the same level, they would need to develop for a period of time. And if they wanted to achieve the goal of earning money, they would have to wait for a few more years. In addition, the basic construction of the two provinces, such as building roads and houses, used reinforced concrete, which was the toughest and most useful material. The investment required was astronomical. This was Yang Qindong. If it was someone else, they would only be able to dream about it and would not be able to use it in reality. Although the development of Crimson City was going well and it already had a strong ability to earn money, every time a ship was shipped, it was equivalent to countless gold and silver being thrown into one's pocket. However, just relying on the ability to produce blood here was not good for long-term development. Moreover, the military factories, power plants, shipyards, and so on were also extremely costly. Sometimes, in order to succeed in a research project, one would have to fork out an unimaginable amount of money. Yang Qindong did not want to place all the pressure on Qisen City. He wanted the businesses in Vietnam and Laos to become more developed and larger. Only then would they be able to produce enough hematopoietic products and sell their own products. However, the scale of the business street was still too small. The number of merchants it could receive was limited, and the amount of goods it could store was also limited. Therefore, he set his sights on the uninhabited palace. Governor Luan is here. Beta Persei's sharp eyes had already seen Luan Shaoqian approaching from afar and reminded him in a low voice. "Ha, little Governor Luan is here." Yang Qindong returned to reality from his contemplation and turned around to laugh. The title of Little Governor Wan was first called by Yang Qindong, so Tiger's Mane and the others often called him that in private. Because of habit, sometimes when they met in person, they would still call him that. This caused Wan Shaochen to be dissatisfied, but he could not say anything. After all, this was Yang Qindong's love for him. Adding the word little in front of the governor's name, would it really not affect his prestige? The sixth young master. Although he was displeased with the word little in his heart, he did not dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction in front of Yang Qindong. He even knew in his heart that adding the word little meant that Yang Qindong treated him as one of his own. If you don't believe me, go and look at the others. Who else had the word little in front of their official title? He should be happy that he was the only one who received this honor. Come, you came at the right time. Yang Qindong stretched out his hand and pulled Wan Shaochen's arm, then pointed to the palace in front of him and said, "What do you think about making this place into a place where business is concentrated?" Here. Wan Shaochen was also shocked by Yang Qindong's words. He instinctively wanted to say the same thing as Tiger's Mane. This was the place where the sixth young master came to rest. It was equivalent to the emperor's side palace. Was he really willing to use it for business? Yes, it's here. Yang Qindong did not care what Wan Shaochen thought. Instead, he said to himself, usually, no one lives here. Instead, we have to arrange for people to guard and clean here. It's simply too wasteful. If he could take it out and make good use of it, wouldn't he be able to use it to attract more merchants to come here? Don't you think this is a good idea? Of course, it's a good idea. Wan Shaochen said with certainty in his heart. As the situation in Laos became more and more stable, more and more businessmen came to get goods. He was worried that the original business street was a little too small. But if he wanted to expand, he would need to invest a lot of money, which made him a little distressed. If the palace could be used, not only would it solve the problem of investment, it could also expand the commercial street, store more goods, satisfy the needs of more people, earn more money, and get more business tax. No matter how one looked at it, it was a good thing. Although he thought so in his heart, Wan Shaochen still asked a question: if this place is changed into a business district, where will the sixth young master live here in the future? Just leave a side palace. The area of this palace is too large. I can't live alone. Yang Qindong answered casually. Obviously, he had just thought about this problem and made a decision. That's also possible. Wan Shaochen nodded. He could only say that it was possible. He could not say that it would definitely work or not. This was where he was smart. The palace was equivalent to Yang Qindong's private property. He could decide how to deal with it. Other people did not have such power, even if he might be Yang Qindong's brother-in-law in the future. Otherwise, if other people knew that he was the one who wanted to use the palace, and then the sixth young master agreed, who knew if it would cause some bootlickers to be unhappy? It was even possible to cause a group of people to attack him because of this. As the territory controlled by Yang Qindong grew larger and larger, and as the strength of the mercenaries continued to expand, no one thought that the sixth young master would be limited to being a loyal duke. Not to mention a duke, it was very normal for him to be called a king and an emperor in the future. Anything related to the sixth young master was not a trivial matter, and there would be more and more rules in the future. Now that he wanted to use his private property, it was inevitable that he would be punished in the future. Wan Shaochen was very careful, and it could even be said that he had a long-term vision. In the eyes of Yang Qindong, he just laughed. He liked subordinates who did things with a sense of propriety. Such people could be entrusted with important tasks and have greater prospects in the future. Well, since you don't object, it's settled. In the future, not only the royal palace here, but also the royal palace in Yunnan province, as long as the other occupied royal palaces can be classified as commercial use. In this way, we can save some time and financial resources to build a commercial street, ha ha ha. Yang Qindong was happy with his idea. At the same time, the words, "you don't object," also removed Wan Shaochen from this matter. If you don't object, it was enough to show that this matter was led by Yang Qindong alone, and it had nothing to do with other people. If there were any problems in the future, naturally, they would not be able to find other people. Yang Qindong's words revealed another piece of information, and that was that he would occupy other palaces in the future. This also shocked Luan Shaoqian, and he took the opportunity to tell the person in charge of Yang Qindong. The sixth young master, there are some problems now, and it started with a business family called Salangan. Chapter 607. Luan Shaoqian didn't know that Yang Qindong had already known about the development of this matter from the beginning to the end, and it was even planned by Yang Qindong. He was just fulfilling his duty as a governor and reported the matter truthfully. Yang Qindong did not intend to interrupt Luan Shaoqian. Instead, he listened to the report very carefully. From time to time, he would frown and nod. After a while, when Luan Shaoqian finally finished, especially when Luan Shaoqian mentioned that the Golden Bian dynasty had begun to gather troops and recruit new troops, Yang Qindong could not help but say, "They are just courting death." He did have such qualifications to say such things. In the eyes of others, the Golden Border dynasty was a great existence. Even in the eyes of the great Ming dynasty, because it was too far away, it was quite out of reach. However, in Yang Qindong's view, it was completely different. The Golden Border dynasty bordered Vietnam, Laos, and Siam respectively. Just like the filling of a bun, it was tightly surrounded by the dough. If it was really aimed at him, Yang Qindong could start from several places. How could he put such a Golden Border dynasty in his eyes? Luan Shaoqian was also excited by Yang Qindong's words. Yes, the Golden Border dynasty's move is no different from looking for death, but the problem is that now the three small countries of Phnom Penh, Siam, and Ava have formed an alliance. No matter which of them is attacked, the other two countries will immediately follow. Although the mercenary is strong, it is still difficult to fight against three. You're right. But let me ask you, is the Sorangan family a citizen of Laos? Yang Qindong asked. Of course. In this regard, Luan Shaoqian gave the answer without hesitation. Well, if they are citizens of Laos, then they are bullied. As the masters, how can we just sit back and do nothing? This will not only lose the hearts of the people, but it will also make others think that we are easy to bully. This must never happen. So if anyone provokes us, there is only one word: beat them. Beat them until they feel pain, beat them until they are afraid, beat them until they are obedient in the future. If we don't even have this bit of courage, then what's the difference between us and other small countries? Remember, the strength of a country doesn't depend on how much territory you have or how much resources you have. It depends on whether your citizens have their own status and whether they can gain the respect of others. Do you understand? This was equivalent to Yang Qindong giving Luan Shaoqian a lesson. The latter listened attentively, and in the end, his eyes lit up. Sixth young master, I understand. Well, if you understand, then do what you should do. Let me, the young master, finish the war in the Golden Bian dynasty. Yang Qindong said confidently. To others, this war was a little sudden, but to him, he had been preparing for it for 4 months, and everything that needed to be arranged had been arranged. Luan Shaoqian left with a happy face. Since the sixth young master said that he would be in charge of the war, he only needed to do the logistics work well. Of course, the economic development of Laos could not be stopped. On the contrary, the huge Lansang palace could be used, and he could use more goods to launch a larger economic trade. After Luan Shaoqian returned to the provincial government, he did not mention anything about the war. Instead, he announced the decision to move the commercial street to the palace and increase the economic trade development. As soon as the news came out, everyone who heard it was shocked and confused. What happened? Could it be that the mercenaries were afraid of the Golden Bian dynasty? Then they wanted to use the increased economic trade share to attract everyone's attention. It made sense. Although the mercenaries had the most advanced firearms, their foundation was too weak. Plus, they had just conquered Vietnam and Laos, so they should be weak. Even in the face of the Golden Bian dynasty's provocation, they had to suppress it first. When the Patriarch of Solingen heard the news, he immediately panicked. What did this mean? Did Governor Wan shrink back? He had created enough public opinion, and now many business families were waiting to see the result. If things were to end like this, it would be very awkward for the party involved. Not only would the family's business reach be unable to reach the Golden Bian dynasty, but the other countries would also vigorously attack them. After all, this matter seemed to be caused by them first. It was just a business family. If they suffered a loss in a foreign country, they could just admit it, and then use more money and more sincerity to build relationships. But they still wanted to kidnap the mercenaries and the Laos government, and use administrative pressure to solve everything. If they succeeded, others would look up to them, and it would be normal for them to give the green light. But now the Laos government did not care about them. Without their backing, the Solingen family would naturally be hated by everyone. Nong Si's face was full of panic. This was not only because he could no longer be the patriarch, but also because the entire Solingen family was about to collapse under the heavy pressure. If that really happened, he would become the sinner of the family, and be engraved on the list of shame forever. Nong Si could not sit still and wait for death. He got on the carriage and went straight to the Long residence. He wanted to ask Long Xian about it. In fact, with his status, he could not get in touch with any of the higher-ups in Laos. The only person he could get in touch with was his family's business partner. Long Qi was also shocked by the sudden news from the provincial government. Previously, Wan Shaochen had solemnly vowed that as long as they exposed the matter and made it known to everyone, the provincial government would not sit by and do nothing. But now, the wind had suddenly changed. What was going on? What happened in the middle of it all? By the time Nong Si arrived at the Long residence, Long Qi had already sent someone to the He residence. He wanted to see if he could meet with General He Guang. If he could see General He Guang, it meant that things were not too bad. Otherwise, things would be troublesome. Recently, he had been using the provincial government's name to contact the nobles in Laos, and he had seen some results. But if he were to be abandoned this time, then all his previous efforts would be for naught. Long Qi himself would also become the object of everyone's disdain. He was afraid that in the future, other than staying obediently in the mansion, he would not be able to do anything else, and no one would be willing to believe in him. Don't worry, don't worry. Long Qi saw Nong Si in front of him, sweating profusely. He comforted him, and at the same time, he was comforting himself. I think Governor Wan is a responsible person. He won't abandon us like this. But he's still too young. Young people are always impulsive. Nong Si said in disbelief. I've already sent someone to see General He Guang. Let's see if he's willing to see us first. Long Qi was also affected by this sentence, but at this moment, he could only hold on to a glimmer of hope and hope that good news would come. After what seemed like 2 hours, it felt like a year had passed. Finally, the person he sent out came back with a message from He Guang. Don't panic. Everything is under control. Just wait and see the results. This was the message from He Guang. Although Long Qi could not understand it, when he learned that the person he sent not only entered the He residence, but also met with General He Guang, he felt relieved. Since He Guang was willing to see his people, it meant that things were not that bad, and there was still hope. No matter how Long Qi comforted himself, many people had already begun to laugh at him. Suddenly, the pressure increased. Whether it was Long Qi or the Solingen family, they were now in a deep crisis. The envoys who had been keeping an eye on the Lao government, especially the governor, Wan Shaochen, were secretly celebrating. In view of Wan Shaochen's strong statement, they were all ready to fight with the mercenaries. But who would have thought that it was all bark and no bite? It seemed that things were not going to end well. This inevitably made some people sigh that the mercenaries were just so. After 5 days, the influence became worse and worse. The nobles who stayed in Lao province also began to increase their communication. From time to time, they would spread rumors that they were not optimistic about the future of Lao province. These nobles no longer had any power, but over the years, they had spread their influence deep into various industries. These nobles were not very good at accomplishing things, but they were very good at causing trouble. Under their influence, the volume of goods sold in the commercial street was greatly affected. The problem that the merchants had to consider now was the safety of the goods that had entered the Yang family's hands after leaving Laos. Although no one could deny that the Yang family's products were unique and of high quality, and they didn't have to worry about not being able to sell their products, what if they were robbed like the Sulangan family? The matter with the Sorangan family was too big. If it was not properly solved, the safety of all the merchants would not be guaranteed. The Phnom Penh dynasty was fine after they robbed the silver. Would the other small countries and regions follow suit? For the first time, there was a backlog of goods. The official in charge of this matter went to see Yuan Shaoqian and suggested whether Chichen City could suspend the shipment or reduce the amount of goods. Otherwise, there would be problems if there were too many goods. Especially when some of the goods still had a shelf life. If they were not sold in time, it would be a big loss. Yuan Shaoqian did not seem to hear the suggestion of the official. Not only that, he also sent people to Chichen City in the name of the governor to rush the goods. This was the confidence that Yang Qindong gave him. In the face of Yuan Shaoqian's actions, many officials expressed their puzzlement. Some of the more straightforward people began to write to Chichen City, asking whether Yuan Shaoqian was capable of being the governor of Lao province. Chapter 608. The situation in Lao province began to change. The criticism of Governor Yuan Shaoqian was getting louder by the day. Yang Qindong, who recommended Yuan Shaoqian, did not say anything at this time, which made many officials puzzled. They even went to the palace in groups of 3 to 5 to meet the 6th young master and express their opinions. But no one was approved. In fact, Yang Qindong was no longer in Wanxiang City, let alone Lao province. How could he meet his subordinates? No one knew that the 6th young master had appeared in front of Shangding City, which was beside the Mekong River. Since things started here, let's start our attack from here. Yang Qindong sighed and looked at Shangding City, which was 5 miles away. He raised his arm gently and then put it down. Beside him, countless Ling Feng and auxiliary soldiers rushed toward Shangding City. Everything happened without warning. At noon, many soldiers of the Golden Bien dynasty were still basking in the sun on the tower. Suddenly, they saw the army green approaching from afar. Their brains short-circuited at the first moment, and then came up with an impossible idea. Enemy attack. No one knew who shouted first. Then, chaos broke out on the city gate tower. The soldiers began to look for bows and arrows and other long-range weapons. Shangding City, which had been peaceful for many years, was suddenly facing a ferocious beast. It was completely unprepared. Before the Ling Feng arrived, it was already in chaos. Close the city gate and send someone to Jujing City to ask for help. The centurion guarding the city shouted loudly. When he realized that no one listened to him, he simply went downstairs, found a fast horse, and rushed out of the city gate on the other side. The centurion's idea was simple. 300 miles behind him, there was a 100,000 army led by General Hun Sen in Jujing City. As long as he sent the message there, it would be a great achievement. It was still the same old saying. The idea was beautiful, but the reality was cruel. Just as the centurion rode out of the city and felt the wind whistling past his ears, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest and fell to the ground with a plop. Due to the inertia, the centurion was sent flying. When he landed on the ground, he was no longer breathing. It turned out that he had been shot in the chest. Since he had suddenly appeared and prepared for such a long time, how could Yang Qindong let the news leak out? When he gave the order to attack, all 4 gates of Shangding City were filled with mercenaries. Before the battle even started, Shangding City was already a dead city. The North City Gate was the main attack, while the other 3 city gates were the main defense. Anyone who rushed out, whether they were dignitaries, soldiers, or ordinary people, was greeted with whistling bullets. With a long spear in hand, who in the world could be his match? With strong fighting spirit and confidence, the mercenaries rushed into Shangding City from the North City Gate without encountering any decent resistance. Then there was a burst of intensive gunfire, and the massacre began. All the people of the Golden Rim dynasty who were still running around on the streets, no matter what their identities were suffering the wrath of the mercenaries. Gunshots came one after another. After only half an hour, the pungent smell of blood floated in the air and did not dissipate for a long time. The street was already full of corpses and rivers of blood, but the mercenaries still had no intention of stopping. Unless they stayed in their homes and did not go out, as long as they went out on the street, they would face a merciless massacre. The mercenaries had never done such a thing before, but this time they took advantage of the massacre of the Sorangan family on the Mekong River to launch a bloody revenge. The mercenaries wanted to use facts to tell the world and warn everyone how terrible it was to be their enemy, and how wrong it was to do so. The massacre lasted for 4 hours, and there was no one left on the street. They stopped and took a breath. The next work was done by the 20,000 Laotian mercenaries. They began to push the doors open one by one. They did not kill anyone, but just called out the surviving people and let them see the bloody scene while cleaning the battlefield. Almost all the Sorangs who were rushed out of their homes were pale, and then vomited. This scene would be imprinted in their minds, and they would never forget it. Clean up the battlefield, gather the valuable things, and arrange a team of 1,000 to drive the carriages back to Laos. Then drive all the people out of Shangding City. Rest for the night, and set off for Jiging City tomorrow morning. Yang Qindong gave several orders in succession. He did not kill all the Phnom Penh people, but deliberately let a group of people go. He believed that these people would become the best mouthpieces. He believed that it would not take long for this bloody scene to spread throughout the Phnom Penh dynasty. He wanted to completely intimidate his opponents before the war began. He wanted to make their morale plummet, and at the same time, make them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts. In this way, when the two armies met, it would be easier for them to win the war. Jiging City. It was one of the big cities at the north gate of the Sorangan dynasty. It was another big gate after Shangding City. At this moment, the city was full of soldiers. Not only in the city, but also outside the city, there were barracks. One after another, there seemed to be no end to it. Hun Sen's 100,000 troops were stationed here. According to the plan, Hun Sen was the vanguard to rush to Shangding City as soon as possible, then go up north along the Mekong River and directly attack Bansa City in Laos. However, the sudden news from Laos made Hun Sen hesitate. He did not forget King Boromir's advice before he came. This was the time to show his strength. It would be best if they did not have to fight the mercenaries. After all, when facing the powerful mercenaries, they had no advantage except for the number of troops. Now that an accident had occurred, Laos acted as if nothing had happened. Under such circumstances, if Hun Sen still took the initiative to attack the enemy's territory, it would not be defending the country, but provoking the enemy. This was tantamount to forcing the mercenaries to fight with them. This was definitely not what the king wanted to see, so Hun Sen stationed his army in Jijing City without asking for permission and biding his time. He only sent someone back to Golden Rim City to ask for the king's orders. Hun Sen originally thought that as the vanguard, he would have to fight the mercenaries to the death, even at the cost of his own life. Unexpectedly, the mercenaries were scared, which made the 100,000 troops happy. During the time they were stationed, all the soldiers drank and ate meat every day. Anyway, the military budget was more than enough this time. Most of it was provided by the nobles, so it would be a waste not to eat and drink. They celebrated as if they had won the battle. Even Hun Sen did not say anything when he heard about it. He had been under a lot of pressure before, and now that the pressure was gone, it was time for the soldiers to relax. Because of this, Hun Sen gained the support of most of the soldiers, which made his popularity soar in a short time. He was almost on par with the first general, Dagon. Hun Sen was still immersed in his vanity, but he did not know that danger was approaching. The 2nd and 3rd regiments of the 1st Division of the Cold Front had arrived outside Jiging City and were ready to launch a fierce attack. After marching for 2 days, they had covered 300 miles under their feet. Then they rested for an afternoon. When it was dark, the regiments, battalions, and companies began to slowly encircle the 100,000 vanguard troops of the Golden Rim dynasty according to their previous orders. The sky was dark, but the camp of the Golden Rim dynasty was as bright as day. Numerous bonfires were set up, and mutton was hanging on each wooden rack. Under the roasting fire, there was a crackling sound, and the aroma spread far and wide. As the vanguard general, Hun Sen sat on a temporary wooden mat, with good wine in front of him and beautiful women beside him. He drank one cup after another and laughed heartily. It was true that one should enjoy life to the fullest, and not let the golden cup be empty to the moon. Beside Hun Sen, there were some captains and kiliarchs. They used wooden mats to form a large circle. In the circle, 2 skilled soldiers were sparring with each other. Occasionally, there would be 1 or 2 weak soldiers in a strong army who were afraid of death. Similarly, in a weak brigade, there were also warriors with good skills. The 2 soldiers who were competing were the best in the Phnom Penh army. They each displayed what they had learned, and the wonderful performance of their fists on flesh attracted a burst of applause from other soldiers. "Ha, good. You're worthy of being the best in our vanguard. Come, reward them." Hun Sen was affected by the fierce fight between the 2 soldiers and shouted loudly. Then the soldiers beside him took the silver and gave it to the 2 warriors who were performing. The 2 warriors who got the silver quickly retreated and were replaced by others. Even if there were benefits, everyone should share them. The exciting fight here attracted even more soldiers to watch and cheer spontaneously. The aroma of the meat and the lively performance in front of the tent not only attracted the attention of most soldiers, but also many soldiers who were in charge of guarding the perimeter sneaked over. They did not think that this was a violation of military discipline, because they had heard that Laos was scared. They seemed to be afraid of the army of the Golden Rim dynasty, and they were deep in the country. How could the enemy appear here? Almost every soldier had the same idea. The army camp was chaotic, and military discipline was useless. This was the army camp of 100,000 soldiers. The night wind was still blowing. A danger that could decide their life and death was slowly approaching. However, not a single one of the 100,000 people was alarmed. They were still drinking, eating, chatting, and talking about things that interested them. Chapter 609. Young Master, these enemies are too weak. Our vanguard is 500 meters away from them, but they still haven't discovered us. Tiger's Mane put down the night vision telescope in his hand, shook his head, and seemed to be singing a lament for the enemy. Humph. An army without a sense of crisis will never be strong. Come on, send out the signal for the general attack. Yang Chindong's eyes flashed. The enemy's carelessness determined their next result. This was the so-called, you reap what you sow. Beta Persei, who had been waiting for a long time, turned around and shouted, let's start the general attack. Yang Er, who had a loud voice to begin with, let out a roar that sounded like the angry roar of the heavens. In an instant, his voice traveled several hundred meters. The second guard team was part-time artillery. After hearing the order, they immediately put the prepared shells into the barrel. Then, the 100mm mortar roared. After flashes of blazing fire flashed in the sky, it fell on the unprepared vanguard camp of the Golden Bien dynasty. Boom! Boom! There was no need to aim at any coordinates at all. Any cannonball that fell down would produce an earth-shaking sound. After every cannonball fell, there would be heart-wrenching screams and screams. Hong Sen, who was still tasting wine and looking at the beauty in his arms from time to time, suddenly felt the ground trembling, as if an earth dragon was about to turn over. Before he could figure out what was going on, huge flames appeared in his sight. He instantly lost his hearing and his mind stopped working at this moment. The only thing left was the scene of him opening his mouth and not making a sound. Kill! The mercenaries, who had already been in place, began to madly rush in from 4 directions. As they continued to move forward, bullets with fire were shot out from the barrel like a dense rain. With the help of the still-burning bonfire, one could see the Golden Bian Dynasty soldiers falling to the ground one after another. This was a massacre, without any suspense. From the very beginning of the war, the situation had been one-sided. Yang Qindong had carefully prepared for the war in Laos for nearly 4 months. With the overwhelming advantage of advanced firearms, the enemy's will to fight had crumbled in less than 15 minutes. The entire camp was filled with soldiers begging to surrender. War was such a miraculous thing. One could win against many with a few, defeat the strong with a weak force, and extinguish the flames of war that should have burned for a long time in an instant. In today's battle, at least 2 of the 3 aspects mentioned above were perfectly reflected. In a situation where their military strength was far inferior to the enemy's, due to their meticulous preparations and unparalleled pressure, the enemy was defeated without even putting up a decent resistance. One by one, they knelt on the ground, no longer as arrogant and insufferably arrogant as before. Originally, they thought that this battle would last until dawn or even longer. After all, there were 100,000 enemies here. Even if there were 100,000 pigs, it would be a laborious task to catch all of them. However, humans were often worse than pigs. At least pigs instinctively knew how to run when they saw danger, but humans would not because they had intelligence and brains and knew how to avoid danger. When they saw that there was no way to escape, they chose to surrender. Perhaps for some people, surrendering was shameful. But for the defeated soldiers, it was a very effective way to save their lives. In just over 4 hours, just after midnight, the 100,000 enemy soldiers were completely under the control of the mercenaries. They were all tied up with long ropes that had been prepared beforehand. Then, they were tied together like gourds. Their heads were lowered, and they looked like children who had done something wrong. Reporting to the 6th young master, the enemy camp has been controlled. More than 90,000 of them have been captured, 4,000 of them have been killed, and 5,000 have escaped. 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Po walked in front of Yang Qindong and reported the results of the battle after a salute. Not seeing Wu Xing report, Yang Qindong thought that he was injured and asked with concern, "Where is Regiment Commander Wu?" Reporting to the 6th young master, Regiment Commander Wu led the 1st Battalion to chase after the enemy. 3rd Regiment Political Commissar and 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo reported after Luo Pa. Chase after the enemy. They didn't catch Hun Sen. Yang Qindong's reaction was extremely fast. He immediately thought of a conclusion. Only when the enemy's main commander was escaping could Wu Xing abandon his troops and choose to chase after him. Yes. This time, it was 2nd Regiment Commander Luo Pa who stood up to answer the question. At the beginning of the battle, the situation was too chaotic and some of the enemies escaped. I didn't expect Hun Sen to be among them. 6th young master, we ask for your forgiveness. 3rd Regiment also asks for forgiveness. Since Wu Xing wasn't around, Political Commissar Chen Bo spoke on his behalf. What are you guilty of? Yang Qindong glared at them. You all have performed very well. It's normal for some of the enemies to escape in the chaos. We have limited manpower and can't defend against them. Besides, didn't Regiment Commander Wu chase after them? Maybe there will be some good news. Just as Yang Qindong finished speaking, a warhorse rushed over from afar. Then, he heard Wu Xing's cursing voice. Damn it, your fighting ability is mediocre, but your escaping ability is top-notch. Fine, there's no need to guess. They must have failed to catch him. Sure enough, when Wu Xing passed through the 1st and 2nd line of defense and arrived in front of Yang Qindong, he saluted with a black face. 6th young master, your humble servant is incompetent. We didn't catch Hun Sen. Did he really escape? Yang Qindong couldn't help but sigh. A vanguard general couldn't be underestimated. Otherwise, why didn't they catch 90,000 captives? Yes, he escaped. I chased after him with the 1st Battalion and killed more than 300 enemies. We also captured some captives, including Hun Sen's soldiers. They confirmed that he had escaped. Wuxing reported in a depressed tone. Then, Wuxing straightened his body. 6th Young Master, your humble servant requests to continue the chase with the 1st Battalion. No matter what, we have to kill this enemy general who looked down on us. Wuxing wasn't just saying. Before the battle, he had made a bet with the 2nd Regiment commander, Luopa, to see who could catch Hun Senator. He had never expected that it would end up like this. Well, there's no need to chase him. Besides, he can't run away. It won't be long before we kill our way into Phnom Penh City. At that time, we'll see how he can escape. As for now, immediately arrange for someone to send the captives back to Laos. There will be people there to meet you. Ha, 90,000 captives, and they're all strong laborers. I think Yu Qian will be very happy to receive them. Yang Qindong laughed. According to the intelligence, the entire Phnom Penh dynasty only had 400,000 soldiers, including 100,000 new soldiers. In one battle, they had destroyed a quarter of the enemy's forces. No matter how one looked at it, it was a great victory. Presumably, when the news spread out, many people would be blinded. The Battle of Jujing was equivalent to a blow to the Phnom Penh dynasty. It proved that the mercenary regime was sacred and inviolable, but at the same time, it exposed their position. Obviously, it was not realistic to launch a sneak attack next. But even so, Yang Qindong and the mercenaries were still very confident in their abilities. Wasn't the reason why they trained as if their lives depended on it? Wasn't it so that they could perform better on the battlefield? Hun Sen escaped. Relying on the fact that his mount was of a better breed, he ran very fast. He only dismounted when the warhorse started foaming at the mouth. At this time, he could already see the walls of the next city, Chuanlong. The mercenaries suddenly appeared in the country and defeated the 100,000 vanguard led by Hun Sen in Jujing. The captives were more than 90,000. After Hun Sen personally confirmed the news, the Chuanlong City Guard sent the news to the capital, Phnom Penh City. Along with the news, there was also the fact that Shangding City was breached and 30,000 civilians were slaughtered. This was all spread by the people who were deliberately released by the mercenaries. There was absolutely no question about its reliability. The two news spread one after another in the territory of the Phnom Penh dynasty, causing waves of panic among the people. The mercenaries were too powerful. In just a few days, they had conquered 2 cities, killed more than 100,000 people, and captured more than 100,000 people. Could the country's army defeat such an opponent? In Phnom Penh City, when the news arrived, it was not only the people who were panicking, but also some dignitaries. They knew that the mercenaries were very powerful. After all, this had been proven by the facts. Because of this, they took out their wealth to support the country's army, hoping that they could win the war with a generous reward. But now, reality had given them a big slap in the face. Everyone was silent at the same time. They also had doubts in their hearts. Was it right for them to support their country to go to war with the mercenaries? In the palace, the moment King Boromir received the news of the war, he sat there without moving for a long time as if he had been petrified. When he came back to his senses, he cursed. First, he scolded the mercenaries for not playing by the rules. They were clearly trying to keep the peace and were about to admit defeat. However, they suddenly sent out troops and caught them off guard with a sneak attack. Then, he scolded Hun Sen for his stupidity and incompetence. Hun Sen's 100,000 troops were completely defeated in less than 4 hours. How was he a vanguard general? He was clearly an idiot. When he thought about how this was caused by this person, he was even more furious. He could not wait to skin this person and pull out his tendons to relieve the hatred in his heart. He had cursed, but the situation would not change because of his curses. What to do next was ultimately up to him, the king. General Dagon, I will give you 150,000 soldiers to guard Chuanlong City. No matter what, you cannot let the mercenaries take a step forward. I will immediately send people to Siam and the Awad dynasty to ask for help. Since we are allies, they can't just stand by and watch us get beaten. Chapter 6:10. The alliance had become his last hope, and Borimov hoped that they would be willing to fight to the death and send troops to Laos. As long as they made a move, the mercenaries would be attacked from both sides. The mercenaries were likely to retreat. Then, it would be time for him to recover what he had lost and restore the prestige of the country. He quickly arranged for people to get reinforcements. Then, he fixed his eyes on Chuan Longcheng. Not only King Boromir, but many people in the entire Golden Border dynasty had their eyes on Chuan Longcheng. They wanted to see the result of the clash between the two armies. Would it be beneficial or disadvantageous? Laos. The news of the victory in the Battle of Jigging City had finally spread. At first, it was just some gossip. There was no confirmation, but it had already shocked many nobles. Didn't they say that the mercenaries would not make a move? Didn't they admit defeat? Why did the battle start so soon? Before that, they did not receive any news at all. There was no lack of smart people among the nobles. They quickly remembered that the 20,000 Laotian mercenaries were transferred to the south. At that time, it was said that it was to eliminate bandits and to prevent the Golden Border dynasty's army from pressing on the border. Now, it seemed that it was just an excuse. They were probably already on the battlefield at that time. The nobles had bribed many Laotian mercenaries. After all, these people were born here. They had too many concerns and too many shortcomings. However, it was obvious that these people were also kept in the dark. They did not know their mission until the moment before the battle. At that time, because of the tight lockdown, they could not send back the news. So, what did this mean? Did the mercenaries know that they would interfere and were already on guard? Or was it all because of military needs? If it was the latter, of course, it did not matter. It was understandable that the army needed to lock down the news. However, if it was the former, would the nobles be dissatisfied with their interference in the mercenaries' affairs? Would they even be the next target of punishment? These nobles were originally people who had lost their power. They had inherited too many things from their ancestors. In fact, they were already in dire straits. If the mercenaries stepped on them at this time, how could they resist? While these people were in a state of panic, the news that the mercenaries had conquered Shangding and Jujing, killing tens of thousands of enemies and capturing 90,000 enemies was reported to the Yang dynasty. For a time, all the Tianxia inns in the various cities were overcrowded. Many commoners squeezed into these inns to drink the free tea and listen to the literate people talk about the news over and over again. Their faces were filled with excitement and excitement. Under the influence of Yang Bao's public opinion, more and more people learned about the policies of Lao province. As Lao province's infrastructure was on the right track, more and more people had jobs and money to earn. Through the distribution of land to the rich, more and more people were able to live on land that belonged to them. As long as the people had land in their hands, they would feel at ease and satisfied. Although the Lao provincial government had only been established for a few months, it had already received the sincere support of many of the people. This time, when they learned that the mercenaries who were guarding the fruits of their victory had won a great victory, almost everyone was happy. If they won the war, it meant that the benefits in their hands would not be taken away at will. In front of a bright future, the Lan Xang kingdom could go to hell. In the past, this kingdom had not treated the people well. If they were allowed to kill their way back, wouldn't they return to the days when they did not have enough food to eat and clothes to keep warm? The people were the most direct in their actions. They did not care about right or wrong, good or bad. They only knew that if someone was good to them, they would be good to that person. Now that the Lao province's policies were on their side, naturally, they would side with the Lao province. In addition, there were the educated youths among them who were spreading the news every day. There were also the Han people who had gained more benefits from the war. Thus, the opinions of the people were surprisingly unified. In the afternoon when the news was published, at least 7,000 young people had signed up to join the army. They were using their actions to support the Lao provincial government. As the provincial governor, Wan Shaoqian was very touched by the actions of the people. However, as a sub-province, there were strict regulations on the number of soldiers they could have. This was to prevent other provinces from secretly expanding. Thus, in the face of the enthusiasm of the people, Wan Shaoqian personally received them at the square in front of the government building. He expressed his gratitude and stated that there was no shortage of people in the mercenary army. He also asked them to return first. If there was a need to recruit soldiers, Yang Baozhong would report it. As for the youths who did not want to join the army on a whim, he suggested that they sign up first to learn some basic military knowledge. If there was a need for soldiers, those with experience would naturally be given priority. After much persuasion, they finally managed to persuade more than 7,000 people to go back. This scene quickly spread throughout the entire Wanxiang city, causing many people to be shocked. In just a few short months, the Lao provincial government had already won the hearts of the people. It seemed like even the Lansang kingdom's most glorious period could not achieve this. With Wan Shaoqian holding the fort and meticulous preparations, the provincial government was operating as usual. Other than continuously sending various war preparations to the front lines, they were fully focused on developing their businesses and infrastructure. Just like Crimson City, they were developing day by day. With the victory at the front lines, the nobles did not dare to make any sarcastic remarks and became much more obedient. The goods that were originally overstocked were also quickly sold out when the news of the victory at the front line spread. Since the mercenary army had expressed their determination to protect the merchant group, what else did they have to worry about? Even if they could not sell their goods to Phnom Penh, Siam, and Ava. But weren't there other countries and regions around them? Just Great Ming alone was a huge market and it was enough for them to mess around. The merchants began to move. Every time they brought in goods, they would have to pay more tax. The money from the sale of goods could not be intercepted in Lao province, and all of it had to be handed over to Chien City after the transaction. However, the tax did belong to them, and they could use it to develop their businesses. Money made the world go round. The development of Lao province entered a faster track. However, in this era of rapid development, there was a sudden movement in Lankai City, which was south of Wanxiang City. The Siam kingdom had sent out 200,000 soldiers and was about to attack the city. As the war progressed, the days passed, and Siam and Ava finally started to make their moves. This was especially so for Siam, whose territory was adjacent to Wanxiang City, where the Lao province government was located. When they received King Boromir's request for help, the higher-ups made the decision to send troops to Wanxiang City. King Ili Chi of Siam was a person with foresight. When Jiaozhi was still around and sent troops to South Ming, his attention was already on this place. If not for the fact that he had to cross Lansang and Jiaozhi to enter Great Ming, he would have already thought of sending troops to seize the resources of Great Ming. What happened next was beyond Ili Chi's expectations. Suddenly, a mercenary army appeared and defeated the seemingly strong Jiaozhi. Then, the mercenary army took over Lansang and changed its name to Lao Province. This series of actions immediately made him feel nervous. Ili Chi was worried about the powerful military strength of the mercenary army. He was worried that they would use this opportunity to attack him. In all honesty, if he had such a powerful army, he would definitely not be soft-hearted. He would definitely raise his butcher's knife and slash down on the people and regions that he felt deserved it. He believed that he was not the only one who felt this way. The mercenary army would also feel the same way. Originally, he was thinking of how to fight his way out of this chaotic world, expand his territory, and create a great empire. However, the unexpected rise of the mercenary army forced him to give up on this idea. Instead, he thought of how to protect himself. This was the reason why Siam, Phnom Penh, and Ava formed an alliance. In other words, they felt the danger and huddled together to protect themselves. They were confident that with the alliance of the three countries, they would have considerable strength. Although it was not enough to destroy the mercenary army, it would at least make them feel pressured. What was unexpected was that not long after the alliance was formed, the Sorangan family incident occurred. While Li Qi was scolding General Hun Sen for his stupidity, he was also paying close attention to the development of the situation. Fortunately, some news came not long after. The mercenary army suddenly stopped mentioning this matter, as if they had admitted defeat. However, why was his heart still unable to calm down? The facts proved that Li Qi's intuition was right. On the surface, the mercenary army seemed to have admitted defeat. However, they had been gathering their forces secretly and launched an unexpected and swift attack. Not only did they occupy two big cities, but they also directly destroyed the 100,000 troops of the Phnom Penh dynasty. This weakened the strength of the enemy and showed the invincible and powerful side of the mercenary army. Li Qi admired their actions, but at the same time, the pressure increased greatly. Today, the mercenary army was targeting the Phnom Penh dynasty. Would they target Siam tomorrow? Instead of letting the mercenary army approach step by step, it was better for them to take the initiative to attack, especially when the mercenary army was confronting the Phnom Penh army. If they suddenly attacked, their chances of winning would be much higher. Once they captured Wanxiang City, not only would they be able to obtain the wealth and various resources in the city, but it would also be tantamount to seizing the mercenary army's escape route. This would greatly relieve the pressure on the Phnom Penh dynasty. As for whether this would lead to the retaliation of the mercenary army. What a joke, they were already enemies. Was there a need to be afraid of such things happening? Siam's unannounced attack caused a wave of panic in Wanxiang City. The nobles who had become obedient began to move again. Some of them even began to secretly contact the special envoy sent by Siam. They seemed to have decided to side with the other party. Chapter 611. The higher-ups were in a state of panic. Some chose to contact the emissary to surrender, some were hesitant and wanted to wait and see. There were also those who firmly supported the emissary. For example, people like Long Qi and then Ong Si. As the governor of Laos, Wan Shaoqin saw all of this. In addition to constantly sending people to capture Siamese spies, he also made preparations to defend the city. Now, he had a company, 2 auxiliary battalions, and 10,000 Laotian mercenaries. If he used them well, it was not impossible to defend the city. Wan Shaoqin had no intention of asking Yang Qindong for help. He was the one who agreed to blow up the Solingans matter. Now that he could not control the situation, he had to look for the person behind him. The arrogant Wan Shaoqin would not do such a thing. He was actively preparing for the battle. He was also considering if he could send the 7,000 people who had signed up to the city tower. These people had already undergone 7 days of military training. Although they were still new recruits, they were not completely clueless. At least they knew what military orders were and what was forbidden. The situation in Wanxiang City became tense. However, most of the staff and officials of the provincial government were not afraid. They did not trust Governor Wan, but they trusted the 6th young master. Since this battle was commanded by the 6th young master, he would not ignore the possibility of Siam sending troops. Now that the news had spread, it would not be long before the mercenary reinforcements arrived. Everyone seemed to believe that Yang Qindong would transfer the troops from Phnom Penh dynasty. However, after waiting for a long time, there was no news. As time passed, people began to waver. Below Chuan Long City, the main force of the mercenary army that everyone had placed their hopes on was now gathered. Yang Qindong was also standing in front of the temporary command center's sand table with a relaxed expression. He didn't seem worried at all because the attack and defense of Wanxiang City was about to begin. Are all the battalions and companies ready for battle? Yang Qindong retracted his gaze from the sand table and turned around to look at the 2nd Regiment commander of the Icy Blade Division, 3rd Regiment commander Wu Sheng, and the Auxiliary Regiment commander Lu Zhua. Everything is ready. We can attack the city at any time, Luo Pa said excitedly on behalf of the other officers. After he finished speaking, a look of struggle and hesitation appeared on his face, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. What's wrong? If there's anything you want to say, just say it. How are you hesitating like a regiment commander? Noticing the change in Luo Pa's expression, Yang Qindong stared straight at Luo Pa, as though he could see through his thoughts. Yes. Luo Pa straightened his body. Sixth young master, there's news that the Siam Kingdom has sent their troops to attack Wanxiang City. Is that true? That's not something you need to worry about. You just need to fight this battle well. Even though Yang Qindong knew that the officers were concerned about the overall situation, Yang Qindong still rejected them without hesitation. One had to be single-minded when doing things. On the battlefield, a small mistake could lead to serious consequences. Since that was the case, there was no point in thinking about things that were beyond one's control. Yes. Luo Pa, who was criticized by Yang Qindong, replied with a straight face. He only wanted to remind the sixth young master. He also knew that the most important thing now was to defeat the Golden Bian dynasty's army. Luo Pa was criticized, but Yang Qindong knew that this was not his idea alone, but that all of the officers probably had the same idea. It seemed that if he did not say a few words, these people would inevitably be distracted, and it would be difficult for them to concentrate. Ah, well, young master has already made arrangements for Wanxiang City. You don't have to worry. If you're really worried, it's better to think about how to defeat the Golden Bian army quickly. As long as the war here is resolved, we can naturally turn back and give Siam a slap in the face. We'll let them know the consequences of provoking us. Yes, defeat Golden Bian and fight back against Siam. The regimental officers in the command center all said bluntly. Well, since everyone is ready, let's check our watches now. We'll launch the general attack in an hour. Yang Qindong raised his right arm, revealing the exquisite military watch on his wrist. At the same time, several regimental officers also looked at the military watch on their wrists. Chuanlong City. It was not a big city in the Golden Border dynasty, but because of its unique geographical location, beside the Mekong River and behind the Orange Well City, it became a strategic place and one of the front doors to enter the Golden Border city of the Golden Border dynasty. At this time, the 150,000 troops led by General Dan were guarding this place. General Hun Sen, who had retreated to this place, had been kidnapped and sent back to Golden Bian dynasty. 100,000 defeated soldiers, this was a crime that this general would have to bear. Once Hun Sen was punished, Dan's influence and strength in the army would rise to a new level. After all, no one would compete with him, and he would be worthy of being the boss. The army entered the city and took over the defense line of the entire city. Dagon also became the boss of the city. After inspecting the defense of the city tower, he returned to his temporary residence and called for a group of singers to sing a song. He crossed his legs and looked very leisurely. He had figured out the situation of the mercenaries these days. At most, there were only about 40,000 people. Their military strength was more than 3 times that of the enemy. With a strong city to defend, what was there to be afraid of? Even if the other party had some advanced firearms and cannons, he was not someone to be trifled with. He had already arranged for an inspection team of 10,000 people. As long as the soldiers did not flee, he was not afraid of the mercenaries with his advantage in numbers. Of course, what gave Dan confidence was that Siam had already sent troops. Now, he only needed to delay the main force of the mercenaries, and it would be a great victory. Once the allies succeeded, the mercenaries would have no choice but to retreat. Now, his mission was to defend Longchuan City, and it would be a victory. The terrain here was very good. The west gate was next to the Mekong River, and the army could not be stationed there. The south gate led to the hinterland of the Golden Bian dynasty, and there would be no enemies. So, he only needed to defend the north and east gates. When the time came, the mercenaries would retreat, and it would be a victory. As for whether the enemy would attack the 2 gates, he would deal with it as it came. With such a thick city wall and so many soldiers, the enemy could not fly up. Besides, even if they relied on the advantage of the cannons to enter the city, so what? When the two sides fought, the power of the cannons would be limited. Then, it would be time for the enemy to counterattack with the advantage of numbers. Don was very satisfied, especially after he kidnapped Hun Sen and sent him back to Golden Bien City. No one in the army could stand shoulder to shoulder with him. The feeling of being completely at ease, and the momentum of being a man of his word, made him feel like he was floating in the air. It was as if the world was in his hands. This feeling lasted until suddenly, the ground under his feet shook, and then it disappeared. Boom, 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 boom. Under the attack of the cannons, the entire Longchuan city was shaking. Some tiles on the houses fell to the ground like rain. The people in the streets were frightened by the loud roar, and they ran around like headless flies. It seemed that this was the only way to reduce the fear in their hearts. Reporting to the general, the mercenaries have started to attack the city. The north gate has been breached. Don was also frightened by the deafening sound. Just as he got up and walked out of the courtyard, a guard knelt in front of him and reported a piece of unexpected bad news. What? The north gate has been breached? Don felt like he was hit by a huge rock. He felt his vision turn black, and his legs went soft, and he was about to fall to the side. Fortunately, the guard reacted quickly and reached out to support him. General, what are you shouting for? I'm not dead yet. Don woke up from the shaking and shouted, immediately send reinforcements to the north gate according to the plan. No matter what, we must take back the gate. At this moment, Don realized that he had underestimated the enemy. He originally thought that the mercenaries were powerful because their opponents were too weak. Otherwise, why would they launch a sneak attack against the 100,000-strong army led by Hun Sen? If they really had the strength, why didn't they fight a fair and square battle? On the battlefield, underestimating one's opponent meant paying a heavy price. It could even be the price of one's life. After shouting these words, Don looked at the guard who was still standing in front of him and could not help but be angry. Go and pass the order. At the same time, order the inspection team to block the enemy. Anyone who deserts will be killed. The army of the Golden Bien dynasty moved slowly. Under the general's order, tens of thousands of soldiers went straight to the north gate, trying to regain control of it. At the north gate, it was Cheng Chunyang of the 3rd Battalion of the 3rd Regiment who attacked. He had just taken up the post of battalion commander not long ago, and this time, he was given the opportunity to lead the charge. Not only did he have the 400 cold vanguard warriors from the 3rd Battalion, there were also 2 auxiliary battalions, totaling more than 1,000 people. Under the accurate bombardment of the 100 mm mortar, the north gate was broken like a piece of paper. Then, with a fierce charge, they arrived at the north gate. At this moment, the field of vision became wider. Battalion commander, the enemy is going to counterattack, and they have a lot of people. The commander of the 1st Battalion, Guo Feng, smiled. During the charge just now, their company was the vanguard of the vanguard. They were the first to reach the north gate, so they killed the most enemies. However, it seemed that this did not satisfy him. He held a machine gun and fired from time to time. Looking at his capable subordinate with a murderous expression, Cheng Chunyang smiled and asked, "What's wrong? Did the battle just now scare you? There are thousands of enemies here. You killed so many people, are you still not satisfied?" Chapter 6:12. You want to scare me with a 1,000-man team? Battalion commander, I'm not bragging. Our company is the strongest. Even if we face a 10,000-man team, we won't frown. Guo Fen said with some pride, and then half a magazine of bullets shot out. Hundreds of meters away, at least 4 or 5 enemies were knocked down to the ground. You're good. Since that's the case, then I'll allow you to continue charging. There are only 10,000 people on the other side now. I'll leave them all to you. Looking at Guo Fen's boastful look, Chen Yangyuan wanted to kick him. But in the blink of an eye, he decided to provoke him and give him a slap in the face. Of course, Guo Fen was bragging. 100 against 10,000, even if they had a powerful flintlock in their hands, it was difficult to do. Not to mention that the enemy was still carrying out a planned charge. Occasionally, the enemy's inspection team could be seen behind the army. With such a great achievement, the company dare not enjoy it alone. It's better to let the wise battalion commander lead us. Guo Fen knew that he was bragging, but he didn't care. Instead, he said with a flattering look. In any case, they would often joke about such things in private. Chen Yangyuan snorted and didn't expose Guo Fen's embarrassment. Instead, he said with a very serious expression, no matter how many enemies come, we have to kill them all. As long as we attract enough firepower from the enemy, the pressure on the commander's side will be reduced, and the faster it will be. Yes. When it came to serious matters, Guo Fen also put away his cynical expression. He turned around and shouted to the soldiers around him while firing his gun, "Fire for me, don't be afraid of wasting bullets, and don't let the enemy counterattack. Shoot!" Bang bang bang, da-da-da, tut-tut-tut, all sorts of gunshots rang out, representing the sounds made by different firearms. Thousands of tongues of fire spewed out together, suppressing the enemy's charging force in an instant. When the soldiers of the Golden Bian dynasty fell down as if they were blown by a hurricane, the momentum of the attack began to slow down. Knowing that they would die if they rushed forward, no one would not cherish their lives. If it weren't for the inspection team behind them, they would have turned around and fled long ago. Gunshots were still ringing out from the north gate, and the soldiers of Chuanlong City were rushing towards the north gate to provide reinforcements. It was as if they would not stop until they had taken back the north gate. While everyone's attention was on the north gate, the attack on the east gate began. Unlike the north gate where there was only one cold vanguard battalion, the one leading the charge at the east gate was the 3rd Regiment commander, Wu Sheng. This time, he had brought 2 main battalions, 4 auxiliary battalions, and 5,000 Laotian mercenaries. His goal was to charge into the city in one go to crush the enemy's morale and destroy their will to fight. The mission Yang Qindong gave them was to be like an arrow piercing through the clouds, tearing the enemy's defensive line in half, paving the way for the main force to enter the city. In order to better complete the 6th Young Master's mission, Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo decided to split up after a discussion. First, the 3rd Battalion, Spring Sun, would take down the north gate and attract the enemy's main force. Then, they would rush into the east gate and catch the enemy off guard. It seemed that this was the only way they could successfully enter the city and carry out the mission. Otherwise, if there were too many enemies, and they were all blocked together, it would be impossible to open a path in front of a sea of people. The plan went very smoothly. While the north gate was busy fighting, the attack on the east gate began. Furthermore, under the careful planning of the 2 main battalions, when the 40 rocket launchers directly smashed open the north city gate, Wu Sheng led the mercenaries and charged in like an avalanche. Everyone was filled with murderous intent, and everyone rushed forward. The guns in their hands were constantly spewing flames, and they were like gods who had descended from the heavens. Whenever an enemy was in their line of sight, they would be hit by bullets as soon as they raised their swords and rushed forward. They would either die immediately or fall to the ground and cry out in pain. Along the way, they looked down on everyone. No one was their match, and no one could stop them. Dagon had already put on his armor and rushed to the north gate under the protection of a group of bodyguards. Before he reached the city, a messenger reported that the east gate had been breached. Quickly send people to block the east gate. Don't let any enemy enter the city. With the previous example of blocking the north gate, Dagon did not panic. In his opinion, even if he had to use human lives, he could still chase the mercenaries out of the city. At this moment, Dagon did not fully value the mercenaries. Or rather, he did not see the true strength of the mercenaries. He really thought that it was an ancient war where he could rely on numbers to turn the tide. He did not know that unless he could stop the mercenaries' charge in one go, the appearance of the mercenaries would only be a tactic of filling the gap. It was not effective at all. The battle at the East Gate was far more intense than the North Gate. One was defense, the other was offense, one was support, and the other was the main force. The situation was completely different. Before they could figure out the mercenaries' true intentions, groups of Golden Border Dynasty troops rushed to the East Gate and were eliminated one by one. When they sent out a 100-man team, they would be wiped out. When they sent out a 1,000-man team, they would be heavily injured. When the 2,000 inspectors arrived, all they saw was a street full of corpses and injured people lying on the ground. What they saw was the main force of the 2nd Regiment of the Cold Vanguard charging towards them with guns in hand. Attack! Seeing that another group of enemies had appeared, and there were quite a number of them, Political Commissar and 2nd Battalion Commander Chen Bo took the lead. He held the 95 style in his hand and activated the burst mode. As he strode forward, he kept pulling the trigger. As soon as the inspection team saw the situation clearly and was about to turn around and retreat, intense gunshots rang out. The 2,000 people instantly scattered like a beehive that had been poked, leaving behind hundreds of corpses on the ground. In just one encounter, hundreds of corpses were left behind. This kind of strong combat power gave the inspection team a feeling of invincibility. In the past, others had always been in the front. Now that it was finally their turn, they felt the horror and strength of the mercenaries. Waves of enemies appeared at the East Gate one after another and were crippled one after another. Finally, it attracted Don's attention. He began to mobilize more and more soldiers to rush to the East Gate. He was delusional to use the tactic of numbers to drive the mercenaries out of the city. Guns are very powerful, but they will run out of gunpowder eventually. Don't be afraid. Just rush forward. As long as you can kill one enemy, you will be rewarded with 10 taels of silver. As long as you snatch a gun, you will be rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Afraid that the soldiers below would not use their full strength, Don led his men to the East Gate while constantly raising the bounty. He believed that under the stimulation of profits, there would definitely be people who did not care about their lives. As long as these people could rush to the front of the mercenaries, it would be time for their cold weapons to shine. When there is a great reward, there will always be brave men. This was undoubtedly a wise saying. Some people who chose to join the army were putting their lives on the line. They were already prepared to die. As the saying went, wealth comes from danger. In order to fight for a better future, many soldiers rushed toward Wuxing's 2nd platoon like moths to a flame. Bam bam bam. Tat tat tat, the sound of gunshots continued. One by one, the enemies fell in the path of the charge. However, the momentum did not seem to have any intention of stopping. Many people were still moving forward with the help of their comrades' shadows. I only have one magazine left. When a cold vanguard warrior reached for his waist, he suddenly felt nothing and shouted subconsciously. I only have one magazine left too. I have 2 more. I don't even have one left. A cacophony of voices rushed into Wuxing's ears. While his face turned bitter, he could not help but turn around and shout, "Who told you to waste bullets like this?" Wuxing could not be blamed for saying this. Before the battle, every soldier had at least 2 basic sets of ammunition. For example, the 95 gun had 600 rounds of ammunition, a total of 20 magazines. At first, they thought it would be enough. Who would have thought that they would run out of ammunition so quickly? All right, everyone, save your bullets. At the same time, equip your bayonets and prepare for close combat. Political Commissar Chen Bo also shook his head helplessly. There were too many enemies. From the moment they entered the city until now, they only had about 2,000 people, including the auxiliary soldiers. However, they had to face dozens of waves of enemies in turns. At least 20,000 to 30,000 enemies had been driven away, defeated, or killed by them. With such a glorious victory, it was reasonable that they did not have enough bullets. However, even if they did not have enough bullets, they could still fight in close combat. With their bone-deep training, they could even kill with cold weapons. The enemies would be terrified of them. Equip your bayonets. Commander Wusheng also knew that the situation was a bit critical. It was not the time to blame anyone, so he shouted loudly. Then he took out the bayonet from his waist and inserted it into the 95 gun. Suddenly, a flash of white light appeared, like a soldier standing in a standard military posture, majestic. Kill! As he sprinted forward, he fired the last bullet in his magazine. Wusheng led the 1st Battalion, 2nd Battalion, for support battalions, and 5,000 Laotian mercenaries as they charged forward. Rows of bullets were fired, and the enemies fell to the ground one after another. The morale of the Golden Bian Dynasty soldiers, who wanted to take the opportunity to fight for their lives, dropped, and then they quickly retreated. The people running at the front were better off, but the enemies running at the back were in trouble. They didn't even have the chance to turn around before the mercenaries caught up with them. Then, one by one, the enemies exposed from behind were stabbed by bayonets and fell to the ground, covered in blood. Chapter 6:13. With a single charge, the 2,000-plus enemy troops were scattered and disintegrated. But before Wusheng and the others could catch their breath, another team of 1,000 soldiers came from not far away. The two sides met in a narrow street in the city. Only the brave would win, and a chaotic battle ensued. At this moment, Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers fully utilized the 3-on-3 tactic. The three of them worked as one and launched a bayonet charge as if it was their daily training. Every time a dazzling white bayonet was thrust forward, an enemy would be stabbed and fall to the ground. Intestines and blood flowed everywhere. The brave mercenaries also led the 5,000 Laotian mercenaries behind them. They were originally armed with cold weapons, either broadswords or spears. At this moment, they finally came in handy. Following Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, they also brandished their swords to kill the enemies, showing their strong combat power. The team of 7,000 people was like a torrent of steel, constantly killing the enemy and attracting the enemy's main force. After fighting for half an hour, the situation here finally attracted more soldiers of the Golden Bian Dynasty. Especially when they heard that the mercenaries did not have guns, some of them felt that the time had come, so they stopped going to the North Gate and went to the East Gate. The pressure at the East Gate was getting stronger and stronger, while the pressure at the North Gate was getting weaker and weaker. When Chunyang and the others launched another long-range shooting, they found that the number of enemies was rapidly decreasing. When they could no longer form a human wall in front of them, Chunyang of the 3rd Battalion decisively said to the correspondent next to him, "Go and inform the 6th young master, the time has come." Yes, the time had come. The first attack at the North Gate and the slaughter at the East Gate were all for the third step, which was the joint attack of Leng Feng's 2nd Battalion, 14 auxiliary battalions, and the 15,000 Laotian mercenaries. Considering that there were 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian Dynasty in the city, if they all attacked from one gate, it was likely that the gate would be blocked. In the end, they would block the way with only the corpses blocking the way. If that was the case, the enemies would have enough time to escape, which would not achieve the goal of severely injuring the enemy. Therefore, there were two waves of feints. Most of the enemies had gone over to the East Gate, leaving the North Gate empty. When Yang Qindong received the news, he immediately gave the order to launch an all-out attack. More than 20,000 mercenaries poured in from the North Gate, joining up with Spring Sun's Cold Vanguard 3 battalions as they rushed into Dragon River City. The 30,000-strong army was like a whirlwind, and no one could stop them. They used machine guns, submachine guns, and semi-automatic rifles to kill anyone who tried to get close to them. The North Gate suddenly became the main attacking force, which made Duane, who was rushing to the East Gate, turn pale with fright. This confusion confused him. Where exactly was the enemy's main force, and where should he place his troops to defend? At this time, the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Bian Dynasty were in a mess. There were even some soldiers who had been rushing back and forth between the north and east gates. Just as they were about to reach the east gate from the north gate, they received a military order to return to the north gate. These generals were all puzzled and thought about the stupidity of the commanding general. However, they had no choice but to turn around and return to the north gate. It was obviously too late to turn back now. The mercenaries had entered the city, and they were attacking while stabilizing their defense line. As they pushed forward step by step, the entire 5 streets near the north gate were successfully taken over by them. After the first step, they began the second step of the attack. The mercenaries divided into more than a dozen teams in different directions, spreading rapidly to the surroundings like a spreading virus, and no one could stop them. A platoon could often be divided into groups. Once they met the enemy's 100-man team, they would raise their guns and fight. With the advantage of weapons, it was easy for a platoon to fight 100. Once they encountered a 1,000-man enemy, they would retreat while fighting, waiting for their enemies to drop dead bodies in the process. Often, as they fought, another mercenary squad would appear from another street. Then, they would launch a pincer attack from both sides. The enemy would become dizzy, the enemy would be at a loss, the enemy would be crying for their parents, and the enemy would be littered with corpses. More and more mercenary teams began to show their terrible lethality and destructive power, slowly giving the soldiers of the Golden Bien dynasty in the city a feeling that there were enemies everywhere, that there was danger everywhere, and that there was nowhere safe. In such an environment, the enemy's morale was rapidly disintegrating. After more than 8 hours of resistance, before night fell, the tight string finally broke. The morale of the soldiers of the Golden Bien dynasty fell to the bottom at that moment, and a large number of defeated soldiers and deserters began to appear. The situation was irreversible. Under the blurred vision, the inspectorate could not see the situation on the battlefield clearly, and more people had the opportunity to escape. As some of the bolder ones took the lead to leave, more and more soldiers began to flee. Black shadows could be seen everywhere in the darkness. Some soldiers even sneaked away 20 meters in front of the inspectorate team. It was almost an open and above-board move. General Damon did not notice all of this. Since the mercenaries attacked at 1:00 in the afternoon until now, 4 or 5 hours had passed. He was panicking all the time, and now he finally had a chance to have a good rest. Under the protection of a group of guards, he leaned against a battlement at the corner of the street and fell asleep. The environment was not good, and there was not even a simple camp bed. However, to the exhausted General Dagon, this was nothing. All he needed was peace and quiet, that was all. In ancient times, people were malnourished and were prone to night blindness. In addition, it was difficult for people to recognize their comrades and enemies from a long distance in a night battle. Therefore, unless it was necessary, no army was willing to fight at night. In comparison, the mercenaries were naturally fearless. In fact, their daily training included night battle training. But tonight, when there was almost no moon in the sky, Yang Qindong made the unprecedented decision to let everyone rest. Although the battle during the day only lasted for an afternoon, because of the large number of enemies, the battle was very fierce from the beginning. This was especially true for the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 3rd Regiment of the Cold Front. Not only did they use up all of their ammunition, but they also engaged in hand-to-hand combat. They were so good at using the 3-on-3 tactic that the enemies were terrified. Because of this, 1/3 of the soldiers in the 1st and 2nd Battalions were injured. Although most of the injuries were minor, if they were not treated in time, it would be easy for small problems to become big problems. With so many injured soldiers, they needed to rest. After the hard battle during the day, the soldiers of the 1st and 2nd Battalions also needed to rest. In addition, they had used up too much ammunition during the day, and urgently needed to replenish it. Yang Qindong simply gave the order for the entire army to rest. He believed that after a good night's sleep, the soldiers would be full of energy the next day and return to the fierce battlefield. Other than the soldiers who were in charge of night duty, most of the soldiers leaned on each other or found a relatively clean place to lie down and sleep. As the commander-in-chief, Yang Qindong did not rest with everyone. With the existence of the key, he only needed to rest for 2 hours a day to recover to his peak condition. Occasionally, it was not a problem for him to not sleep for a night. Without rest, he led Beta Persei and some of the members of the first guard squad to walk through the streets that they had previously occupied. The entire street was still filled with the stench of blood. Although most of the corpses had been moved away, the blood could not be washed away in a short period of time. When the stench of blood was combined together, it was inevitable that it would give rise to a very unpleasant smell that made people want to vomit. Fortunately, it was not the first time that the soldiers of the Cold Front and the auxiliary soldiers were on the battlefield. Although the smell was unpleasant, it was not unbearable. Besides, why would people care about the smell when they were tired? In this way, under the unpleasant smell, the soldiers of the mercenary army fell asleep everywhere in the streets and alleys. They were not cut down to the ground, but they were so tired that they simply found an open space to sleep. In the battle during the day, the army of the Golden Bian dynasty showed a strong resistance. Dawn was indeed worthy of the title of the first general. His tenacious fighting spirit made the mercenaries put in a lot of effort. Coupled with the role of the inspectorate, they fully showed the demeanor of a strong second-class army. Previously, Yang Qindong divided the army into 4 classes. The strong cold front was the first class. When the number of enemies was too high, a second-class army was enough to threaten a first-class army. This battle was a bit difficult, so it was reasonable that the soldiers were tired. Walking on the street, Yang Qindong's eyes were filled with adorable and tired soldiers. Once he noticed that a soldier's hands and feet were exposed outside of the blanket, Yang Qindong would step forward and help cover them up again. If the soldiers knew about this scene, they would be extremely excited. After all, it was their 6th young master who personally helped them to tuck in the corners of their blankets. Yang Qindong wasn't the only one who helped. Yang Qindong, who was beside him, and the members of the first guard team who followed him also helped. There were too many soldiers and they were too tired. Except for the cold front who was equipped with a sleeping bag and did not need to worry about catching a cold, the auxiliary soldiers and the Laotian mercenaries did not have such conditions. While covering the soldiers with the quilt, Yang Qindong said to Beta Persei beside him, "Tomorrow, arrange for people to go to Resin City and have them produce more sleeping bags. Our soldiers can't fall sick because of lack of rest. This is a great injustice to them." "Young master, I will remember." Beta Persei nodded heavily. This was the young master's concern for the soldiers. Such an order must be passed down as soon as possible. Chapter 6:14. There is a price to pay for hard work. At the same night, one side's commander was sleeping soundly with countless deserters under his command, the other side's commander was running on the path of caring for the soldiers. The soldiers had a good rest, and when the new day came, they would be more powerful. From this point of view, the outcome was clear. The sky finally brightened. Beta Persei, who was beside Yang Qindong, had been replaced by Tiger's Mane. He was busy making a bowl of hot porridge and sending it over. "6th young master, the porridge just came out of the pot. Try it." "Okay." Yang Qindong took the porridge, took a sip, and sighed, "It tastes good, and it has a lot of calories." "Very good." He. Although the porridge was not made by himself, Tiger's Mane grinned when he saw that Yang Qindong was satisfied. "By the way, have the other soldiers drunk?" Yang Qindong just sighed and then focused on the soldiers. "They are all queuing up to drink. By the way, young master, the scouts have sent information that at least half of the enemies escaped last night. Today's battle should be much easier." When it came to business, Tiger's Mane also restrained his smile and changed into a serious look. "Well, this time the enemy is more stubborn, and their strength is still barely enough. Fighting with such an enemy will be of great help to improve the combat power and will of the soldiers. But at the same time, this is also the main force of the Gilded Dynasty. According to the intelligence of the Security Bureau, defeating them is equivalent to breaking their backbone. It will be much easier to conquer them next. At this point, Yang Qindong raised his head and poured the entire bowl of porridge into his mouth. At this time, he had a heroic aura on his face. Pass down the order. We'll launch the attack in half an hour. Deep in Chuanlong City. Compared to Yang Qindong's heroism and hot-bloodedness, Dagon's face was filled with rage. Who would have thought that after he woke up from his sleep, he would realize that more than 50,000 of his soldiers had run away in just one night? Including those who had died on the battlefield yesterday, he now had less than 50,000 soldiers that he could use. What's going on? Didn't I tell you not to open the South City Gate? Where did those people escape from? Don't tell me all 50,000 of them jumped down from the tower. Dagon asked in disbelief. If it was only a few hundred soldiers using ropes and other objects to escape from the city gate tower, he could still understand. However, how could he accept the fact that 50,000 people escaped in one night? The bodyguard who was asked had a bitter look on his face. Knowing that the general was angry, not only could he not leave, but he could only stay here and explain. Thus, he carefully answered, "General, it was the captain guarding the southern gate who opened the gate and escaped, so, bastard." After hearing the explanation, Dagon raised his leg and kicked him. The bodyguard who was half kneeling was unlucky. He fell to the ground and wailed in pain. Ignoring the soldier's pain, Dagon pulled out the saber on his waist and roared, "So what if 50,000 people escaped? I still have 50,000 men, which is more than the mercenaries. Today, I will fight them to the death." Dagon's words were filled with pride, but the dozen or so bodyguards beside him all fell to their knees and pleaded, "General, you can't do that. Now that the morale of the army is low, and the soldiers are exhausted. We can't fight anymore. Where there's life, there's hope. General, please take a step back and regroup. If we fight again another day, we will definitely win. There's an imbalance of power between us and the enemy. You can't use force, General. General, please reconsider." The bodyguards made all kinds of sounds. Their purpose was the same, which was to persuade Dagon to retreat. The army had lost its morale. If they fought now, they would only suffer heavy losses. Yesterday, they had 150,000 men, but they did not gain the slightest advantage. They lost tens of thousands and injured tens of thousands. They did not think that they could defeat the mercenaries with only 50,000 men. The bodyguards were not afraid of death, but they thought that it was not worth it to die in such a bloody battle. It would be better to take a step back and fight again after the army was reorganized. That way, the chances of winning would be much higher. You guys. At first, Dagon was unafraid of death, but the bodyguards seemed to be in the same tone. They kept persuading him, which made Dagon's momentum stagnate. Then, his head drooped down like a lifeless puppet. How could Dagon not know that it would be foolish of him to fight the mercenaries under such circumstances? But he was not willing to give up. The 150,000 men under him were the most elite force of the Golden Bian dynasty. With more than 3 times the number of men, the defense of the city wall, and their familiarity with the terrain, they could not defeat the mercenaries. He really did not know how to win. He had a feeling that once he gave up here, it would be difficult to defeat the mercenaries again. But if he continued to fight, how could he win with insufficient troops and low morale? If he retreated, it would be difficult to win. If he fought, he might be wiped out. This was a dilemma to begin with. But he still had to make a choice. Dagon sighed and the sword in his hand fell to the ground. Forget it. If that's the case, let's retreat. Inform the soldiers in the city to withdraw as much as possible. Then prepare to set fire. Even if we leave, we can't let the enemy have a good time. Dagon finally made the decision to retreat, which made the bodyguards happy. This proved that they did not have to die, so they nodded and agreed. But before they could pass the order, the familiar gunshots suddenly sounded, and then became more and more frequent. It seemed that they were not far away. Not good, the mercenaries are attacking, "General, let's go, or I'm afraid it's too late." The bodyguards heard the gunshots that were getting closer and closer. Their faces changed drastically, and they rushed to Dagon's side. If he did not retreat, they would carry him and retreat. Retreat. Dagon wanted to say something tough, but he did not know why. When he heard the gunshots, he was a little scared. Perhaps it was the psychological trauma left by yesterday's battle. But since the enemy had attacked, and he was not fully prepared, it would be meaningless to continue fighting. It was better to retreat now and save some strength anyway. Dagon escaped, and before he left, he gave the order for the entire army to retreat. However, because the mercenaries had launched their attack too early, and because they had replenished their ammunition, many of the enemies were caught before they could escape. In the end, only 20,000 of the 50,000 managed to escape. After General Dagon fled, the mercenaries did not pursue, but began to clean up the enemy forces in the city. The battle lasted from morning to night, and the situation was basically stabilized. Compared to yesterday, Leng Feng did not have any casualties today, and only 3 soldiers were slightly injured. 13 auxiliary soldiers were killed, and 100 were injured. More than 100 Laotian mercenaries were killed, and more than 1,000 were injured. In exchange, they captured more than 40,000 enemies and killed more than 10,000 enemies. In addition to yesterday's battle, they killed more than 30,000 enemies and captured 50,000 enemies in the Battle of Chuanlong City. More than half of the 150,000 soldiers of the Golden Border Dynasty were killed, and 80,000 of them were killed. Hurry up and search for anything edible and useful in the city. The troops will rest as they move. We will rest for one more night. Tomorrow morning, we will move towards Suwang City. After Yang Qindong received the final battle statistics, he immediately issued a new order. In the morning of the second day, the main force of the mercenaries went straight out of Longchuan City, and in just 2 days, they arrived outside Suwang City. Suwang City was one of the biggest cities in the Golden Border Dynasty, and it was an important crossroad to the capital of the Golden Border Dynasty. From here, one could enter Golden Rim City from Pingzhan City in the north. One could also enter Bolomian City in the east. It could be said that once this place was taken, the initiative would change hands, and Golden Border City would face the possibility of being besieged at any time. The news spread like the wind to the south, and when it reached Golden Border City, King Boromir was so shocked that he almost fell off his dragon throne. The civil and military officials didn't have a good reaction either. Some of them were pale because of fear, some of them were red because of anger, and some of them clenched their fists because they wanted to go to the front lines and fight to the death with the mercenaries. Their reactions were different, but the same thing was that they all felt the existence of danger, and the feeling of a knife on their necks. Trash! Trash! What the hell is Dagon doing? 150,000 people can't even stop 40,000 from the enemy? Didn't he claim to be the #1 general of our country? Is this how he behaves? After digesting the defeat at the front line, Boromir roared. He was just venting out the dissatisfaction in his heart. Then, he began to read out the royal orders regarding the current situation. First, send the army forward to meet up with General Dagon, who was setting up defenses in Suwang City. Although the general did not perform well in the Battle of Longchuan City, now was not the time to punish him, and he had to be used to stop the mercenaries. Second, urge the 2 allies, Siam and Ava, to send out their troops quickly. If they did not send out their troops, the Golden Border Dynasty would be gone, and the alliance would cease to exist. At this moment, the Siam army and flag could be seen outside the south gate of Wanxiang City, the capital of Laos province. Siam had sent 100,000 soldiers to Wanxiang City earlier than King Boromir had expected. Behind them, there were another 100,000 soldiers in Wulong City, the largest city in the north of Siam. They could provide reinforcements at any time. The general leading the army was named Godun. He was the representative of the younger generation of the Siamese military. He was only 35 years old, but he was already the commander of an army of 200,000. From this point alone, it could be seen that he was favored by the king. Chapter 615. Riding on a horse, dressed in a general's armor, Lan Sang's face was full of confidence. Below Wanxiang City, Godun was full of pride and arrogance. Beside Godun was the famous general of Jiaoji, Fan Yuhai. This person was like a ghost who always made the right choice on the battlefield, escaping the pursuit and punishment of the mercenaries time and time again. This time, Fan Yuhai followed the Siam army and brought along 5,000 elite cavalrymen. After many rounds of elimination, the remaining 5,000 were undoubtedly the best of the best. According to Yang Qindong's evaluation, they had surpassed the standard of a second-class army and were moving towards a first-class army. General Fan, how long do you think it will take for our army to conquer Wanxiang City? With an arrogant expression, Godun raised his head as he spoke, as if he would not be able to match his status if he did not do so. General Fan, the Siam army is made up of elite soldiers. It's just a small Wanxiang city, we should be able to conquer it in less than 3 days. Fan Yuhai's face was calm and even seemed a little low-key. He was not as arrogant as Godun, but even so, he had a dazzling aura and was not to be underestimated. Ha ha ha. Hearing Fan Yuhai's reply, Godun laughed out loud. All right, I'll take your blessings. Come on, charge and conquer Wanxiang City within 3 days. Then, I'll allow you to conquer the city for 1 day. Conquering the city for 1 day meant that within 1 day after conquering the city, the soldiers could take whatever they wanted. As long as they took it, it would belong to them and they would not have to hand it over. This was a special reward for the soldiers. Kill, kill, kill. When the soldiers heard the benefits promised by the general, they all roared loudly, bursting with a strong fighting spirit and morale. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, the governor of Laos, Wan Shaochen, was supporting himself on the battlements. His eyes were filled with determination as he looked at the 100,000 Siam soldiers below the city. The speed of the Siam army's appearance was far beyond Wan Shaochen's imagination. However, he was not afraid. Not to mention the strong confidence that Yang Qindong brought him, he himself had a strong confidence at the moment. All of this came from the company of Ling Feng, 2 battalions of auxiliary soldiers and the 10,000 Laos mercenaries led by General He Guang. With a strong city and 10,000 strong soldiers by his side, Wan Shaochen had no reason to be afraid of the 100,000 Siam soldiers. Furthermore, the 6th young master would soon hear about what happened here. He only needed to defend for a while and reinforcements would arrive. That would be the moment of victory. Everyone, get ready for battle. Ling Feng and the auxiliary troops, aim and shoot. Whoever dares to approach the catapults will die. Standing below the city gate tower, Wan Shaochen, who was only 18 years old, had a bright light flashing in his eyes. His body was full of fighting spirit. When he was in Crimson Castle, he had the experience of training auxiliary soldiers. During the Battle of Ryukyu Island, he had also participated in the battle as a political instructor. He was no longer a war newbie. At this moment, he was not afraid. Instead, he was filled with fighting spirit and vigor. After receiving the order, Ling Feng and the auxiliary soldiers on the city wall immediately looked for the best shooting position and aimed at the slowly approaching catapults. Catapults were a siege weapon that had been around for a long time. They had always been used to break through a strong city. They could throw out huge rocks in an instant. When the rocks hit the ground, they could cause great damage. It was extremely useful for suppressing the enemy's attack or destroying the enemy's defense. Of course, such a war weapon had its fatal weakness. For example, if the attack distance was too short, its strength would decrease after a mile and it would not be able to use its advantage. Another example would be the lack of accuracy when attacking the target. Often, when a rock was thrown out, it would not be able to predict where it would fly. Most of the time, it depended on luck. Even so, catapults were still widely used. It was because the technology was too simple. Usually, the armies of small countries would use it. It was not like artillery, which required a large amount of manpower, resources, and energy. Even if Qiqian City was powerful, the current arsenal was still unable to produce artillery. The best they could do was make some grenades and landmines. All the artillery they used now came from a large warehouse. Fortunately, after obtaining the advanced books from Yang Qindong, the munition factory in Crimson City had no problems producing shells of various calibers. Their research on cannons had also made some progress. Given enough time, it was only a matter of time before the cannons were born. The Siamese army did not have any cannons. The mercenaries stationed in Wanxiang City also did not have any cannons. Yang Qindong would not be at ease leaving such powerful weapons anywhere unless he had a strong military force. Otherwise, if this matter was leaked out, it would not be helping Laos but harming it. There would be people who would think of ways to deal with it. The chances of them being targeted would only be higher. There were no cannons, but there were still 10 Type 40 rocket launchers, hundreds of artillery shells, grenades, and landmines. Wan Shaoqian had already buried the landmine 300 meters away from Wanxiang City's southern gate. He had led the entire Lingfeng company to set them up at night. Even many officials in the provincial government did not know about this matter. At a distance of 300 meters, the sound of an explosion would not affect the soldiers guarding the city and could even kill the enemy. It couldn't be any better. However, this was just a method. The real battle depended on the performance of both sides. How to prevent the enemy's catapults from getting close to the city and not letting them do their job was the most important thing in a city defense battle. 1 li was 500 meters. At such a distance, if it was a cold weapon battle, it would be impossible to do anything. As the defending side, no matter what kind of bow and arrow they used, they would not be able to hit the catapults from such a distance. They could only shrink back and let the enemy attack. Since the enemy could not hit accurately, it was all about luck. The same thing happened to the mercenaries, but it was different. They had the Type 95 and Type 81 rifles, which could easily hit the catapults up to 600 meters away. Naturally, they had the ability to control the catapults. What they needed to do now was to prevent the enemy from getting close. Wan Shaoqian gave the order. The Lingfeng company and the auxiliary soldiers, who were in charge of the first batch of attacks, looked for the best positions. They focused their attention and waited for the enemy's catapults to get closer. In their line of sight, the catapults with large wooden wheels were slowly approaching. As long as they got close enough, they would be able to hit the catapults with boulders. Regardless of the effect, at least the momentum would be there. Then, when the soldiers charged with all their might, if they were lucky, they would be able to set up scaling ladders. Perhaps they would be able to take down the city tower in one go. If they were unlucky, it would be a battle of distance. In the end, the weaker side would be the winner. 700 meters, 650 meters, a soldier from the Lingfeng company made a judgment with his sharp eyesight. His voice was heard by his comrades. Even if the catapults were 700 meters away, they would still be able to hit them with their rifles. However, they did not do so in order to pursue accuracy. They did not want to amaze the world with a single brilliant feat, 620 meters. 600 meters, fire. When the Siamese soldiers finally reached the optimal firing range, gunshots rang out. Because it was daytime, they couldn't see the gunfire clearly, but the sound of gunfire did not stop. Then, the Siamese soldiers around the catapults fell to the ground one by one as if they had been bewitched. Is this the power of the new repeating rifles? Not bad. Riding on his horse, General Gordon squinted his eyes with an arrogant expression. Then, his surprise turned into excitement. Before they came, the military had obtained some information about the mercenaries. Naturally, they could not hide something like the rifles from them. After meeting Fan Yuhai, he had a better understanding of the situation. The first time he met Fan Yuhai, he was indeed shocked. At the same time, his greed was completely ignited. In Gordon's eyes, he had brought 100,000 soldiers with him and could mobilize another 100,000 soldiers behind him. However, Dealing with Wanxiang City, which only had 10,000 soldiers, was as easy as using a cannon to kill a mosquito. In fact, he even thought that the moment he arrived with his army, the domineering aura would cause the mercenaries to immediately open the city and surrender. Things didn't go as he expected, but Gugu wasn't too disappointed. Are you not convinced? Want to fight? Then I'll beat you until you're convinced. I'll beat you until you can't fight anymore. From the perspective of a victor, the enemy's belongings would eventually belong to him. Didn't that mean that after he won, these repeating rifles would also become his spoils of war? He thought that once he had all these and the number of troops, he would become an invincible army. At that time, Siam would inevitably become the core of this region and enjoy a glorious situation like the Great Ming Dynasty where thousands of countries came to pay homage to it. As the general who had made the greatest contribution to the war, wouldn't he also have great power and authority and be respected by everyone? Gordon, who was still in a state of fantasy, was quickly interrupted by Fan Yuhai. General Gordon, did you see that? The repeating rifles of the mercenaries are very powerful and accurate. It's time to send in the Iron Shield soldiers. Fan Yuhai continued to tell the secret of the Iron Shield's ability to block bullets to the Siam Kingdom, just like how he told the destroyed Lansang Kingdom. Back then, he organized a battle to attack and defend Hanoi City. Now, he was going to do the same to attack and defend Wanxiang City. The difference was that Wan Shaochen, who was also a provincial governor, was very careful. He guarded every city gate and made it impossible for them to launch a sneak attack. They had no choice but to attack the city openly. Chapter 6:16. However, it did not matter. This time, Siam had mobilized 150,000 soldiers, which was far more than the Lansang Kingdom had mobilized previously. As for the 5,000 cavalrymen that he brought with him, they were there as bystanders. If everything went well, he would not mind getting a share of the loot. If not, he would run as fast as he could. In short, he would not let the mercenaries catch him. Not bad. Men, order the Iron Shield soldiers to lead the charge. Although Gordon was unhappy that Fan Yuhai had disrupted his fantasy, this was a war. Every soldier that died was another loss. Hence, he decided to listen to Fan Yuhai and send out the Iron Shield soldiers. Iron shields that were more than 8 centimeters thick could block bullets from muskets. Iron shields that were more than 10 centimeters thick could also block bullets from muskets in close combat. This had been proven countless times. Before the war, Siam had mobilized a lot of resources and gathered a lot of blacksmiths in the country to forge 5,000 iron shields. The shields were held by 5,000 strong men to defend against the enemy's muskets. Under Gordon's command, the 5,000 Iron Shield soldiers appeared. Once the 1.5-meter-tall iron shield was set up, it could cover their entire body and protect them from the threat of firearms. It's the Iron Shield soldiers. On the city wall, the Leng Feng soldiers cried out in shock. However, that was all they could do. They were not worried. They did not forget that Governor Shaowan had led them to bury many mines. Those were the best weapons against the Iron Shield soldiers. The Iron Shield soldiers can only protect a portion of the people. Look for opportunities to attack those who are not protected. Wan Xiaochen's expression did not change as he spoke calmly. What happened this time was a test for him. If he could fend off Siam's attack, he would not only be an outstanding local governor, but also a capable general. His knowledge of both civil and military affairs would allow him to walk a better and broader path in the future. The general did not panic and the soldiers were confident. Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers began to look for opportunities to fire continuously. Although this could not stop the enemy from approaching, it was still able to eliminate the enemy's strength to a certain extent. At the same time, it was also a considerable deterrent. Once the shield was out, the gunshots continued. Compared to before, it was much more sporadic. Gordon, who was on his horse, laughed. He could bear such a loss. As long as the main force of the army could approach the city walls, with the help of the trebuchets, their morale would definitely soar. Perhaps if they were lucky, they would be able to seize control of the city walls after a few attempts and obtain the final victory. After the Siamese soldiers threw down hundreds of corpses, the catapults were finally positioned at a distance of 500 meters. Then, boulders were lifted out of the catapults. With the help of levers, the boulders flew into the air and smashed towards Wanxiang City. From afar, the momentum was astonishing, but the weakness was also very obvious. Out of 10 boulders thrown out, it was already very good if one of them hit the city tower. Most of them hit the city wall, causing the ground to shake, but it did not affect the overall situation. But it had to be said that the trebuchet's momentum was still very impressive. Under its encouragement, more and more Siamese soldiers followed behind the shield-wielding soldiers and began to move forward step by step. Sure Air could even see the appearance of scaling ladders through the cracks. This was a great tool for climbing the city walls. Hit them. Hit them hard. Above the southern city wall, Wan Shaoqian could clearly see the enemy slowly approaching because of the high ground. The shield could only protect the front of the soldiers and not the top of their heads. Therefore, the enemy's head was clearly displayed in front of the defenders. They did not even need to aim. All they needed to do was fire a shot at the top of the enemy's head, and one of them would die. This made Cold Vanguard's auxiliary soldiers feel very good. However, they were more excited to see what would happen when the enemy entered the 300-meter-long defensive line. 50 meters left, 30 meters left, 10 meters, Leng Feng was still using his vision to estimate the enemy's position. Boom, 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 boom. Finally, when the first row of shield-bearers crossed the 300-meter battle line, the mines were triggered, and a loud explosion rang out. The powerful force blasted the shield-bearers away, and the huge force sent countless people into the air. The aftermath of the explosion was like a huge wave on the sea, overturning the mountains and overturning the seas, throwing one enemy after another to the ground. At this moment, the Siamese army suffered heavy losses. Not only were more than half of the 5,000 shield-wielding soldiers killed, but most of their shields were also blown into pieces. The Siamese soldiers behind the shield-wielding soldiers were caught off guard and suffered heavy casualties. Hit them. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. We still have a lot of ammunition in the palace. Hit them hard. Wan Shaoqian also took a 95-style pistol and opened up a burst of fire towards the city walls. Leng Feng and the auxiliary soldiers, who were originally in charge of the replacements, were also mobilized. The 900 soldiers were firing at full capacity. At this moment, they were fighting to their heart's content and killing to their heart's content. Under the dual threat of landmines and muskets, the Siamese soldiers, who had lost thousands of soldiers, lost their morale and began to retreat. They trampled over each other as they retreated. Many soldiers died at the feet of their comrades. In such an environment, those who were pushed to the ground would never get up again. How did this happen? How did this happen? What the hell was that thing that exploded? What was that? Seeing his soldiers falling to the ground in droves and turning into corpses, seeing the metal shields being thrown all over the place, some of them even deformed, and seeing the majestic army retreating like frightened rabbits, Gordon was enraged. He turned and stared at Fan Yuhai. His eyes were red and burning with rage. Fan Yuhai was also shocked by the scene before him. He had not seen the mercenaries use such weapons in the previous battles, so he was not prepared. He had forgotten that most of the previous battles were sieges. The use of landmines was naturally limited. In the only battle of Hanoi City, he did not want to destroy the commercial street. Moreover, the Jiaoji army was charging ferociously and did not have time to plant landmines. Hence, he did not use them. However, it did not mean that they could not be used. Now, they finally came in handy. They caught the Siamese army off guard and dealt a heavy blow. The effect was shocking. These are landmines. Actually, the Ming dynasty has used them before, but they were not this powerful. Fan Yuhai was indeed a famous general in Jiaoji. He quickly thought of the deceased generals Ruan Gengwang and Chen Heijin. Both of them had encountered such things in the rainforest. They even said that the mercenaries called them landmines. They were powerful weapons that would explode upon contact. Didn't this match what was happening before him? Landmines? Since you knew, why didn't you say so earlier? Gordon continued to blame him. Obviously, he did not want to bear the consequences of losing the first battle. He wanted to push all the blame to someone else. Fan Yuhai did not answer. Instead, he looked to the front and said calmly, "General Gordon, let's retreat first. There is no one controlling the catapults. The morale is low. Let's regroup and prepare for battle." Following Fan Yuhai's gaze, Gordon noticed that his trebuchets had stopped working and the soldiers in front of the trebuchets were all lying on the ground. It was obvious that this was the result of the continuous firing of the flintlocks. They had lost the first battle just like that. Although Gordon didn't want to admit it, he knew that this wasn't the time for loyalty. He could only grit his teeth and say helplessly, "Beat the gong to retreat." Retreat 5 miles. The Siamese army retreated. They did not even want the bodies of the soldiers, catapults, and shields. The resources were all within the firing range of the mercenaries' muskets. Who could snatch them back? Unless they launched an all-out attack. However, if the problem of landmines was not solved, could they really do it? Victory! The enemy ran away with their tails between their legs. On the south wall of Wanxiang City, when the Siamese army retreated, cheers erupted like a tsunami. It was like a farewell song, mocking the incompetence of the Siamese army. Don't move. Soldiers, go down and clean up the battlefield. Bring back those that can be brought back, and burn those that can't. Wan Xiaoqin's face was flushed with excitement. However, as the commander, he suppressed his excitement and spoke calmly. They could only send the soldiers down because the landmines were not completely destroyed. If they sent someone else, the landmines might explode and cause unpredictable consequences. After that, the soldiers of Cold Vanguard carried barrels of kerosene out of the city. There were too many enemy corpses, and the best way to collect them was to burn them all. Otherwise, with so many corpses, it was inevitable that germs would appear and cause a plague. The Siamese army, which had already retreated, could only watch helplessly as the mercenaries carried out their operations below the city walls. They had tried to wreak havoc earlier, but they were quickly met with a barrage of gunfire from the top of the city walls. They had no choice but to retreat after throwing down hundreds of fresh corpses. This made General Gordon even angrier. He stomped his feet and cursed in the barracks at the back. However, there was nothing he could do. "General Gordon, please don't be angry. The most important thing now is to find a way to destroy their landmines. Otherwise, we will be in a passive position." Fan Yuhai was not a subordinate of Gordon and he had his own 5,000 cavalrymen. Although he did not have a large number of soldiers, he was powerful. When he faced Gordon, he naturally said whatever he wanted to say. He felt detached from the situation. Solve? How? It would have been better if he did not mention it. When he mentioned it, Gordon was furious. Before the battle started, Fan Yuhai said that conquering Wanxiang City would be a piece of cake. Why didn't he say that there were landmines? He caused Gordon to lose thousands of men and horses in the first battle. He even lost 2/3 of his iron shields that could block muskets. Now, he had less than 2,000 iron shields. His preparations were destroyed in an instant. He was in a passive position now. Chapter 6:17. We have to come up with a solution. Fortunately, we are the ones attacking and the enemy won't dare to attack us. We still have the initiative. We have time to think of a solution. Fan Yuhai frowned. Gordon claimed to be a famous general in Siam, but his temper was a little too bad. On the battlefield, victory and defeat were common. If they lost this time, they would find the reason and win the next time. What was the use of getting angry? Alright, let's think of a solution quickly. I can't wait to attack Wanxiang City. Not only will I kill the mercenaries guarding the city, but I won't let the civilians off either. I want them to die. I want them to be terrified. In the future, if anyone mentions my name, they will have to keep quiet and avoid me. Godin, who was still in a state of rage, had a furious look on his face as if he was really infuriated. Wait. On the other hand, Fan Yuhai wasn't affected by Godin's emotions. Instead, he was moved after hearing Godin's words. After about 3 breaths, he suddenly clapped his hands and laughed. Yes, that's it. Ha, I've already thought of a way to break the enemy's landmines. Seeing that Fan Yuhai had come up with a solution so quickly, Godin looked at Fan Yuhai in confusion, as if saying, can you do it or not? Don't try to fool me with a random solution and make me lose more soldiers. General Godin, didn't you mention the civilians just now? Let's let the civilians walk in front. Do you remember what I told you a while ago? Look for the civilians in Siam. As long as we gather them and push them to the front line, they will step on the landmines. Won't we be able to break the enemy's formation easily? Fan Yuhai laughed. Godin was the best at making use of the civilians. He used this method when he was fighting with the mercenaries previously. However, he was confused by the mercenaries' retreat. Then, his plan was broken during the counterattack at night. He had no choice but to give up on this idea. This time, with so many landmines in front of him, he couldn't help but think of this matter again. Moreover, he could guarantee that this method would be effective this time. Godin was also a demon who killed without batting an eyelid. Not to mention the Hans, he would not hesitate to sacrifice his own citizens or even his own soldiers. Hence, he would definitely not reject such a method to make use of the Hans. Ha, good. General Fan is indeed smart. Since that's the case, this general will immediately give the order to gather all the Han citizens in the nearby cities and send them to the front lines, ha ha ha. When Godin heard Fan Yuhai's words, he had really arranged for his men to count the number of Han citizens in his territory. However, it was just a count. The arrogant him did not think that he would need to use any methods to deal with the 10,000 plus mercenaries. However, it was different now. The appearance of landmines gave him a huge headache. Since the Han people were useful, he would capture all the people who did the statistics. However, this would take a few days. Godin thought that he had grasped the method to deal with the mercenaries. However, what he did not know was that as his troops approached Wanxiang City, he initiated a provocation. This was equivalent to giving the mercenaries an excuse to deal a heavy blow to Siam. Some people would ask, Yang Qindong is leading the 2nd and 3rd regiments of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division into the territory of the Phnom Penh dynasty. Most of the Navy's Cold Front Division can only be on duty at sea. Now that Wanxiang City is under siege by the enemy, where are the soldiers coming from? Don't forget, before the war started, when the matter with the Salangan family was still brewing, Yang Qindong had disappeared for a period of time. It was during that period of time that he had already set up a trap for Siam. At that time, he thought that once the mercenaries and the Phnom Penh dynasty started a war, this country would definitely be restless. Since Yang Qindong was personally involved, how could the battle array be too small? Otherwise, it would not match his status. In fact, the commander that he left behind in Siam was one of the 2 heads of Yang Xie's military, the commander of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, Ling Song. Wulonggu was also known as Wulongthani City. It was one of the biggest cities in the north of Siam. At the same time, it was also the rear of Gordon's 100,000 soldiers. It was used to provide military supplies and for emergency use. However, there were only 50,000 soldiers here. 500 of them were sent to capture the Han civilians. At this moment, such a large city was secretly surrounded by the mercenaries led by Commander Ling Song. 20 days ago, Leng Song was ordered by Yang Qindong to secretly enter the country with the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division and 8 auxiliary battalions. They hid in the dense forest. They even saw with their own eyes that Gordon led 100,000 soldiers out of Wulonga City and headed straight for Wanxiang City. At that time, they could have set up an ambush. However, Leng Song did not do so. After that, they saw the 50,000 soldiers out of the city. However, they still did not make a move. In Yang Qindong's words, now was not the time to start a full-scale war with Siam. If they took the initiative to attack, it would be unjustifiable. Their military strength was limited. This was the shortcoming of the mercenaries. In a war where they could not win, such a war was not worth the effort. After seeing another 50,000 soldiers pass by, Leng Song immediately carried out the military operation plan formulated by the 6th young master. He started to plan for Wulonga City. The plan was divided into 3 parts. First, secretly enter Wulonga City and attack them from the inside. Second, severely injure the 50,000 soldiers of Siam and burn their military supplies and provisions. They would have no choice but to return. Third, when Gordon returned, the mercenaries would give up on Wulonga City and ambush them. They would try their best to eliminate their forces so that they would not have the energy to invade Wanxiang City. As long as these 3 points were achieved, Yang Qindong would have enough time to settle the matter of the Phnom Penh dynasty and reach the final conclusion of the peace talks. Yes, this time Yang Qindong did not intend to swallow the Phnom Penh dynasty. He did not have such a big appetite. He had not even occupied Vietnam and Laos for a long time. The internal affairs had not been settled yet. How could he take over the Phnom Penh dynasty? If he really did that, there would not be enough manpower to protect and manage the place. It would only benefit other countries. Yang Qindong would not do such a loss-making deal. Leng Song quietly left Chichen City. Although he was the commander of a division and the only division commander in the army, he would be credited for any results that the Leng vanguard achieved on the front line. However, how could the fruits of victory be better than the fruits of victory obtained by himself? This time, Yang Chen finally transferred him out and gave him great expectations. Leng Song held his breath in his heart. Not only did he have to complete the task, but he also had to complete the task at the smallest cost. He had to show the heads of his subordinates that he didn't rely on his seniority, but he had the real ability. He had great ambitions and was especially attentive in executing the 6th young master's military plan. He first sent people to disguise themselves as the Phnom Penh dynasty's caravan and entered Wulong City. In order not to attract attention, the Leng vanguard entered the city in groups of 3 to 5 people and kept a low profile. They entered different inns in the city like a drop of water thrown into a river. No one would have thought that the enemy would suddenly appear behind them. In addition, there was only 1 battalion of the Leng vanguard that entered the city. The 400 people were divided into many groups and entered the city separately. For a city with a population of 100,000 people and 50,000 soldiers, this number of people was really nothing. They did not reveal themselves. A battalion of the Leng vanguard entered the city, indicating that the first step of the plan was successful. After the news of Gordon attacking Wanxiang City came, they had an excuse to start the war. Now, they would fight in self-defense. Leng Song arranged for his scouts to enter the city and contact the Leng vanguard warriors. They decided to attack Wulong City tonight. The battalion commander of the 1st Regiment's 3rd Battalion, Xiao Yining, entered the city. This person had displayed astonishing leadership skills in the process of reclaiming and pacifying Ryukyu Island. In addition, he was qualified. Thus, he naturally became the 3rd Battalion commander of the 1st Regiment. Many people were envious that he could enter the 1st Regiment and become a battalion commander of the Leng Vanguard Battalion. But to him, this was nothing. His goal in life was not limited to being a battalion commander. In his opinion, he should at least be a division commander. Only then would it be awe-inspiring, and be considered a true glory. There was no need to doubt the ability of a person with such ambitions. After secretly meeting with the scouts in the city and receiving the new military order, Xiao Yining began to run around, quickly contacting all his subordinates. They agreed that they would act in the middle of the night to take down Wulongnan city gate and lead the main army into the city. Compared to the flames of war on the front lines, there were soldiers and horses. Wulong City, which was at the rear, could be said to be peaceful and prosperous. They were also fighting with mercenaries. As the main attacker, there was naturally no pressure. Furthermore, Siam's military strength had always been at the top of the nearby countries. This made them think that they were saints and everyone else was mortals. With such an arrogant mentality and the stimulation of the 50,000 Siam soldiers entering the city, the entire Wulong city fell into a false state of prosperity. With a large population, it was naturally easy to do all kinds of business. For example, the restaurants, casinos, and especially the brothels in the city were filled with people and were extremely lively. Even if the front lines reported that the attack was not going well, it did not seem to affect them much. They could do whatever they wanted and enjoy themselves as much as they wanted. Of course, they did not do nothing. For example, after receiving General Gordon's orders, they sent out 50,000 soldiers to capture the Han people in other cities and towns. Chapter 6:18. Just like how Yang Qindong would think that those who were not of the same race were not of the same race. The people of Siam also had the same thought. No matter how many years these Han people had lived in their country, as long as they were Han people or their descendants, they were not to be trusted. Their status was also the lowest. Now that they had to capture these people, the soldiers sent out to carry out this mission did not feel any burden at all. It was as if it was only right to treat the Han people however they wanted. The soldiers swaggered through the streets and left. Naturally, their mission was leaked. When Xiao Yining heard that the enemy troops were going to capture Han people, he sensed that something was wrong. This made him even more determined to take action tonight. When the news reached the ears of the other Ling Feng soldiers, they were enraged. They could not wait to destroy Wulong City and disrupt the enemy's plan. Amidst the torment, night finally arrived. The sky was getting darker and darker. When the watches of the soldiers of the 3rd Battalion of the Cold Front Battalion showed 11:00 at night, they began to walk out of the inns. Then, like ghosts in the night, they split into dozens of groups and slowly and carefully moved toward the southern gate of Wulong City. The Siamese soldiers were too careless. They did not expect the enemy to infiltrate their rear. The soldiers guarding the gate were completely unprepared. Originally, there were 1,000 soldiers guarding the gate. However, there were less than 300 soldiers left. The other 700 soldiers had applied for leave to play in the city. Arrogance were bad habits that should not exist in an army. If an army had these habits, it could only be said that they were not far from being destroyed. When Xiao Yining led the 400 Ling Feng soldiers to the south gate, he saw the enemy's morale was low. Wait a minute, something is not right. Seeing that there were only about 300 enemies in front of him, Xiao Yining instinctively stopped moving forward. He led the soldiers to hide in the shadows. Go, find the brothers who stayed here. Without Xiao Yining's order, the Ling Feng soldiers who stayed here to observe the situation found him first. They then explained the situation to him. Battalion commander, the enemy did not notice us. There should be 1,000 soldiers here, but most of them applied for leave to play in the city. Even the Chiliarch left. Is that so? Xiao Yining was shocked when he heard this. He didn't dare to think that something like this could happen. If something similar happened in Lingfeng, everyone from the highest officer to the lowest squad leader would be punished. They would be given demerits, and it was even possible that they would be expelled from the military. Needless to say, the Siamese soldiers were truly blessed. Of course, some happiness came at a heavy price, such as one's life. Good, it's good that the enemy is not prepared. This is our chance. The Xiao family wanted to laugh out loud. They looked at the watch on their wrist. It was 11:45. There was still a quarter of an hour left. With Leng Feng's ability, he had more than enough time to prepare. Inform everyone to begin the operation. No one is to make a sound, and no one is to fire. Turn off the safety. I will punish whoever drops the ball later. The Xiao family's expression was stern as they issued the military order in a cold voice. Leng Feng and his brothers, who had been impatient for a long time, quickly formed groups of 3 and crept towards the 300 enemies that were still illuminated by the torches. Even though there were only 300 people left, they were obviously distracted. They were either leaning against the wall, half squatting on the ground, or leaning against each other. They were all resting with their eyes closed. Perhaps, in their subconscious, they didn't even think about the danger they would face if they stayed here. Without the slightest bit of alertness, Leng Feng's mission was very easy. They only needed to keep an eye on the target, walk behind or beside the target, and then cover the target's mouth with their large hands. Their left hand, which held a military knife, gently cut forward. Bright red blood spurted out, and a life was lost. The eyes closed forever, and there was no longer any breath. Perhaps some of the Siamese soldiers struggled before they died, but under Leng Feng's large hands, their struggles and resistance were futile. They only sped up their blood flow, but it didn't change the situation at all. Outside the torches, the Siamese soldiers were silently slaughtered one after another. In just 5 minutes, more than 100 enemies outside the perimeter were all killed. There was no sound or movement from the beginning to the end. This was the strength of the Leng Feng, and it was the result of their training. It was another kind of report. After the enemies outside the perimeter were all killed, the next target was the 100 enemies under the torches at the city gate. It was unrealistic to try and assassinate them one by one, but Xiao Yining wasn't afraid. He waved his hand, and a portion of the 1st Company and 2nd Company of the 3rd Battalion quickly approached the city gate with him. They moved cautiously, and even though it was only a distance of 100 meters, it actually took them more than 5 minutes to walk. During this time, the 100 people didn't make any noise other than the sound of their breathing. Finally, they approached the south gate. Xiao Yining was the first to pounce forward like a tiger. Within a breath, more than 100 Leng Feng did the same. Puff, 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 the military knives silently pierced the chests of the Siamese soldiers. The intense pain immediately woke them up. Some of them even wanted to scream before they died, but when a large hand appeared in front of their eyes and reached their mouths, everything was over. A total of 300 enemies, except for one Siamese soldier who was stabbed in the wrong spot and died after a scream, the other 299 people didn't have the chance to make a sound. Xiao Yining stared at the Leng Feng who made a mistake. Fortunately, there were no more enemies at the south gate. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. Open the gate, send the signal, and lead the army into the city. Xiao Yining immediately stopped and ordered. There were only 2 minutes left until midnight. Outside the south gate, Ling Song led the 1st and 2nd battalions and 8 auxiliary battalions of the 1st battalion to wait. Everyone's eyes were resolute as they stared straight ahead. They didn't even blink for a long time. Commander, there are only 2 minutes left. Will Battalion Commander Xiao and his men encounter any problems? Political Commissar Mo Qingyu asked worriedly. Commander, why don't I lead my men up the tower? I don't mean to brag, but this tower is only a dozen meters tall. My men and I will only need a minute to climb it. 2nd Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang sounded more anxious as he spoke in a hoarse voice. Don't we still have 2 minutes? Let's wait a little longer. We have to have faith in Battalion Commander Xiao, Ling Song said calmly. How could he not know the capabilities of his own battalion commander and Leng Feng? Even if there was an accident, he should have heard gunshots. However, there was no movement, so why was he so anxious? As soon as Ling Song finished speaking, the south gate 400 meters away slowly opened from the inside. A bright torch appeared and flickered 3 times to the left and 3 times to the right. Ha, we did it. Battalion Commander Ling Daqiang couldn't help but laugh excitedly. he could finally enter the city and start a massacre. During this period of time, the 1st Regiment had been carrying out missions in Crimson City, dealing with the captives and other matters that were sent to the island. He was already tired of it and couldn't wait to show off his skills on the battlefield. Now, the opportunity had finally presented itself. That's our secret signal. Advance. Ling Song carefully looked through the night vision binoculars. After confirming that it was Xiao Yining's secret signal, he gave the order. Then, the 4,000 mercenaries stood up from the ground and crazily rushed forward. In front of the south gate, the city gate had been completely opened, allowing the mercenaries to rush in. Ling Song appeared in front of Xiao Yining along with the army. Battalion Commander Xiao, you've worked hard. How's the situation? Commander, the south gate has been controlled. The enemies in the city have no other defenses. Xiao Yining gave a standard military salute and replied. Very good. Ling Song nodded approvingly. This result was better than he expected. Originally, he thought that with 400 mercenaries against 1,000, they would have to make some noise. That way, the city gate could be opened, but the enemy would be alerted and counterattack. But now, the city gate was occupied, and the enemy was kept in the dark. This way, they had more time to set up their plans. Since the enemy hasn't noticed, we can't follow the first plan. Let's go with the second plan. Ling Song said in high spirits. The second plan was to enter the city without alerting the enemy. Then, with the Cold Vanguard Company and the Auxiliary Battalion as one unit, they would march separately. This way, his troops would be divided into 21 units. If they appeared in various parts of the city and fought at night, it would give the enemy the impression that they were everywhere. With more than 4,000 men, they would be able to unleash 10 times the power. It would be more effective in conquering and destroying Wulong City. Fortunately, Ling Song had prepared the second plan. Although at that time, he didn't think it would work. However, due to the carelessness of the Siamese soldiers and the perfect performance of Xiao Yining's 3 battalions, the second plan could be implemented. Suppressing his excitement, Ling Song gathered the 13 company commanders of Ling Feng and the 8 battalion commanders of Ling Feng. Follow Plan 2. Get to the designated location as fast as you can. Remember, try not to make any noise before you get there. Even if you accidentally encounter an enemy, it's best if you can deal with them without making a sound. When it's 1 o'clock, everyone will attack with all their might. Understood? Chapter 619. Ling Song held a map of Wulong City that he had prepared a long time ago and spoke to his subordinates. Familiarize yourself with your destination. If you don't understand, come and ask me. Now, I will give you 5 minutes to prepare and assemble your troops before we depart. Before they came, the officers had already imprinted the first and second plans in their minds. How could anyone not be familiar with them now? Therefore, after nodding their heads, they went to gather their troops and instructed them to not make any noise as much as possible and to arrive at the designated location as quietly as possible. If they wanted to kill the enemy, they would start from one point and kill as much as they wanted. 5 minutes later, the unit furthest away from their destination set off. Then, the second unit, the third unit. Soon, Ling Song and Political Commissar Mo Qingyu also disappeared from the south gate. In less than 10 minutes, everything returned to normal. Only the night breeze could be heard. At this time, Wulong City was shrouded in darkness and silence. It was already past 12 o'clock. Those who wanted to sleep had already gone to sleep. Those who wanted to play had already found a place to bury their souls. Everything seemed to be the same as usual, until the sound of swords clashing could be heard on the street, breaking the silence of the street. They were the 100 soldiers guarding the south gate. Because they had lost all their money in gambling, they had no choice but to leave early. Unfortunately, they bumped into a group of mercenaries who were rushing towards their destination on the street. The two sides suddenly met on the street. On one side, there were 100 gamblers who had lost all their money. On the other side, there were 400 auxiliary soldiers. After the two sides looked at each other, a short battle began. The 100 Siamese soldiers who did not bring any weapons were the ones being slaughtered. However, they still screamed before they died. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In the silence of the night, the screams spread far and wide. It also attracted the attention of the nearby residents. The commotion was getting louder and louder. Battalion commander, what should we do? A company commander stabbed the last Siamese soldier to death on the ground with a bayonet. He turned around and asked the battalion commander. Don't think too much about it. Go to the rendezvous point as fast as you can. The auxiliary battalion commander secretly cursed his bad luck, but he didn't panic. This was just a warm-up before the big battle. The team of 400 people quickly left. When the people nearby came out to take a look, they saw the ground full of corpses and the smell of blood. Ah! Someone screamed first. Then, similar screams came one after another. The commotion spread far and wide. Finally, the people on the other side of the street were alerted. Then, the Siamese soldiers in the city also received the news. The hour hand was approaching 12:50. There were still 10 minutes before the general attack. Except for a few small teams that were further away from the destination, most of the soldiers had already arrived at the designated location. However, the streets were already bustling with activity. The death of more than 100 Siamese soldiers was definitely a big case, and it attracted the attention of many people. Many Siamese captains, Kiliarchs, and centurions who received the news were rushing over with their men. Even at this moment, they still didn't think that they were in danger. They just thought that some fugitive and his subordinates had bumped into each other and got into a fight. The hour hand kept moving. Finally, it pointed to the final destination, 1:00 in the morning. Send the signal. Attack! Commander Leng Song's voice trembled. He was excited. As soon as he finished speaking, a bright red signal flare rose into the sky and lit up the sky. Following which, gunshots and grenades rang out all over the city. The all-out attack had begun. At this moment, Wulong City had turned into a city of fire. Flames shot out in all directions, incessant and endless. The power of the Type 95 and the Type 81 assault rifle formed an impenetrable fire net. All the Siamese soldiers in front of them became live targets. Whenever the soldiers gathered together to form a dense charge, a series of grenades would end their lives. Their bodies were thrown high into the air before they fell heavily to the ground. Any Siamese who walked on the streets, whether they were generals or soldiers, armed or ordinary civilians, became targets for the mercenaries. They were like food in the eyes of a beast. They were constantly bitten and devoured. They died or were injured. There were gunshots everywhere and enemies were everywhere. It gave people a feeling that there was nowhere to hide and nowhere to hide. It seemed that at this moment, no place was safe. No place was heaven. Charge! Charge out! Report this to General Gordon. We must charge out. The 5 captains of the Siamese army in the city shouted at the top of their lungs. It seemed that if they didn't do this, they would lose all hope. Retreat! Retreat to the south gate. After an hour of continuous gunshots, the Siamese soldiers gradually came to their senses. After a few consecutive charges and countless deaths, they finally understood how terrifying their opponents were. At this moment, no one was thinking about fighting with the enemy who had entered the city. They only had one thought in their minds, and that was to retreat. They had to escape and leave this hell on earth. Gunshots were heard intermittently throughout the night. When the sky finally brightened, the streets were littered with corpses. From time to time, among the crowds, there were survivors who were injured and wailing. Many places in the city were on fire. The places where food and weapons were stored were severely damaged. Even when the sky brightened, the fires showed no signs of stopping. It was still burning fiercely. The mercenaries had retreated, leaving behind a city full of corpses and injured soldiers. According to the statistics, more than 60,000 soldiers and civilians of Siam were killed or injured in this battle. At least half of them were burned by the fire and trampled to death. In fact, only about 10,000 people died in the hands of the mercenaries. The warehouse was burned. Apart from the corpses and the injured soldiers who could not be moved, there was no one left in the city. The scariest thing about this battle was that they didn't know who did it, and they didn't know how many enemies there were. They only knew from the survivors' descriptions that there should be a lot of enemies, and they seemed to be everywhere. Moreover, they all had very powerful rifles in their hands, and they even suspected that the other side had cannons. Otherwise, why would there be the sound of explosions from time to time? It was unknown whether outsiders believed in such a statement, but the people living in Wulong City firmly believed in it. Because on this night, at least half of the 100,000 people were affected. Their families and friends were either killed or injured. Out of the 50,000 Siamese soldiers, more than 10,000 were killed and 10,000 were injured. The remaining 30,000 soldiers were lucky enough to escape. They did not dare to stay in the vicinity. Instead, they went straight to Qing City, which was south of Wulong City. From afar, the 30,000 soldiers looked like a group of homeless people. They wore tattered uniforms, their eyes were lifeless, and their morale was low. Most of them did not even know where their weapons were when they escaped. At this moment, who would dare to believe that this was an army with level 3 combat power? Were they supposed to be the elite soldiers of Siam? In a dense forest about 10 miles south of Wulong City, Ling Song was leading his army to reorganize themselves. After a night of battle, they had achieved their goal. Especially after burning the enemy's military supplies and provisions, General Gordon had no choice but to retreat. How is it? How is the count of the casualties? Although Ling Song also felt a little tired, as a commander, he naturally couldn't just fall asleep like ordinary soldiers. There was still too much work for him to do. He needed to preside over and make decisions. Commander, Ling Feng has returned. There are only 2 injured soldiers. However, it is not a big problem. They just need to rest for a while to recover their combat power. 7 auxiliary soldiers died and 200 were injured. 3 of them were seriously injured. The rest only had light injuries. The political commissar of the 1st Regiment, Mo Qingyu, looked at the statistics of the battalions and reported to Ling Song. Good. Arrange for a platoon of auxiliary soldiers to send the 3 seriously injured soldiers away. The rest of you should take the time to rest. In the afternoon, dig out the ammunition buried in the forest. Replenish them and be ready for battle. Hearing that Ling Feng did not suffer any losses and only lost a few auxiliary soldiers, Ling Song felt some heartache. However, overall, he was satisfied with the results. Ling Feng was indeed Ling Feng. Not only was he good at killing the enemy, he was also good at protecting himself on the battlefield. Especially when it came to city warfare in the middle of the night. Who knows how many times they had practiced it. Their hard work had finally paid off. As the commander, Ling Song was also proud of it. Immediately report to the 6th young master about our results. Also, tell him that we are not going to go deeper into Siam. We are going to stay here and ambush Gudan. Last night's battle at Wulong City went too smoothly. Ling Song's side did not suffer any losses and they were able to safely retreat from the city. This gave Ling Song a lot of confidence in the upcoming battle plan. Since he was leading the 1st Regiment of Ling Feng and 8 auxiliary battalions, they should be the main force. Wherever they go, they should be able to kill the enemy until they can't find their way north. As the saying goes, it is better to break 1 finger than to injure all 10. Ling Song decided to show Gudan his power. It would be best if he could kill this person. If he could not kill him, he would at least severely injure him. This way, when Gudan thought about hiring mercenaries in the future, he would tremble without a fight. After the telegram was sent out, Yang Qindong, who was in Phnom Penh dynasty, received the report. He immediately gave orders and agreed to Ling Song's request for battle. However, he also gave his own suggestion. If they could fight, then they should fight. If they could not fight, then they should not force themselves. It was more important to preserve their own strength. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.